August 17th meeting of the City of Lakeland Planning and Zoning Board. The board meets the third Tuesday of the month to review proposals for changing the city's comprehensive plan, its future land use map, zoning changes consistent with the map, and conditional use permits. The board is made up of 7 members appointed by the City Commission and is assisted by the staff of the Community and Economic Development Department and the city attorney's office. Staff will advance any presentation slides that should have been provided prior to the meeting. The meeting is divided into 2 parts. The first part is a public hearing where we expect to hear new applicants explain their request and receive comments from affected parties. The second part of the meeting is termed the general meeting and primarily consists of acting on recommendations from staff about the cases that came up in the prior month's meeting. We invite everyone who wishes to participate to be heard. We do ask that you be concise in your comments and that speakers avoid being repetitive. That is, if several people have pointed out traffic concerns, there is no need to hear additional comments regarding traffic again. But we would like to hear anything new that has not been addressed. In order to allow everyone to have an opportunity to speak, there will be a 3-minute time limit for each speaker, and the clerk has a timer for this purpose. We respectfully ask that you adhere to this rule. We also ask that at this time you silence all mobile devices. Also, when you do come up to speak, please give your name and your address. With that, we thank you all for being here, and I'll turn the meeting over to the Secretary, Robert Roberts.
Good morning. Item 1, conditional use to construct a 180-foot high ground-mounted personal wireless facility, cell tower, on approximately 24.07 acres located east of Lakeland Highlands Road and north of State Road 570, Polk Parkway. Owner Mike Burkhead, applicant Robert Smith, Gulfstream Towers LLC, and this is for consideration of final decision.
Good morning. I'm Phil Scarce, Principal Planner with Community Economic Development. We're coming before you today with a new cell tower application. This is located on the Holloway Park property just east of the Sam's Club, right off of the Polk Parkway. We'll go into some location slides here in a second. It's a general location of the proposed tower. This is the location of the parent site. Excuse me. You can see the Sam's Club here. This is Polk Parkway. This is the exit off the Lakeland Highlands. And again, this is the parent parcel. This is the tower site, that little rectangle there they'll be leasing. The tower site will be accessed off of Meadowlark Boulevard. It's the entranceway. You're probably familiar with this site. This was the VA hospital that was approved last year. So again, this is the location of the tower site. This is a 180-foot monopole type tower with internal antenna array. Again, just going to show you some more slides here where this is looking on Polk Parkway at that right at the exit of Lakeland Highlands Road. And this is looking north, basically, into where the tower site is. A little dangerous to take pictures out there, so these are from Google Earth, as you can see. This is the applicant's site plan and showing you the elevation of the tower, which is also in the conditions. This is attachment C1 within the listed conditions. So you have the applicant, the tower site here is just going to be a leased area, and you can see the monopole tower here, 180-foot unipole, excuse me, unipole tower, 180-foot unipole with the internal antenna array for a potential of 5 separate users there. You can see where it'll also be landscaped that shows currently it's meeting our land development code. The next slide is just actually the landscaping plan that they'll show. This is from the applicant's larger package that they'll be submitting for site plan approval. We just took out the 2 most important slides that would go, or pages of this package that would go as attachments. So this is attachment C2 within the conditions. I'll just leave the conditions there for a second, but I just want to leave this up to see if the applicant wanted to come up and see if he had any comments for you, or if you have any questions for the applicant. Did you want to come up?
Hi, my name is Rob Schmidt. I'm with Gulfstream Towers. Again, it's a 180-foot unipole. All the antennas will be inside the tower, so there'll be no structures outside. And we're trying to cover a gap in coverage for 2 wireless carriers right now. Once the tower is built, it has the potential to hold 5. Any questions?
Can you identify who the 2 carriers are?
Right now, it's AT&T and Verizon.
Any other questions from the board?
We've had so many tower applications over the past year. What is that the highest it can go, or is that the maximum height?
Technically, you can build a 500-foot tall tower. But the carriers right now, because of 4G and 5G, their antennas actually have to be lower for a stronger signal strength. Between 180 and 150 is what we've been building a lot of. So the carriers dictate where their antennas need to be, and we build the site to accommodate them. So that's what the RF engineers are who is driving tower heights.
Any other questions? Thanks, sir.
Yes, sir.
Any comments from the audience?
Again, I just we'll go over the conditions. I just wanted to mention that the zoning, present zoning on this site is limited development. Again, it's part of the Holloway Park area, and the future land use is residential medium. The reason for the conditional use permit is our maximum height within the LD zoning is 150 feet, so they're requiring a conditional use permit to exceed that height, but and staff is fine with that. We, for your information, we did not receive any calls or complaints as far as the location. I think this is a tower site where I think we can all agree with. I don't want to speak too soon, but compared to the last tower sites, I think there's really not much opposition here, except the only thing out there is cows. But in front of you in the screen here, you have the 6 conditions that we're proposing. The permitted uses: a ground-mounted personal wireless facility, along with accessory structures as equipment, shelters, and generators. Site development plan shall be in accordance with those 2 C1 and C2 that I just showed you. The cell tower design in accordance with attachment C1. We have a unipole design, which all antenna arrays are internally mounted and contained within the tower structure. Again, the maximum height is 180 feet. Landscaping buffer in accordance with the Article 4 of the Land Development Code. and attachment C2 that has been met with that landscaping plan. And access, prior to the building permit issuance, the easement, an access easement shall be executed and recorded with the Polk County Clerk of Course to allow for cross-access between the subject parcel and the cell tower compound lease area in substantial accordance with their attachment C1. And with that, staff recommends approval for this conditional use permit. From here, it will go to the City Commission. This is the public hearing, and this is your final approval for this. And from here, like I mentioned, we'll go to City Commission for a public hearing with them as well.
Thank you. Any questions? All in favor of approving the recommendation from the
Aye.
opposed? Thank you.
Was there a, who made
Yeah.
the motion and then
Yeah, there was-
who seconded it?
I make a move that we approve the conditional use permit.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, thank you.
Item 3, changes to Article 9. I'm sorry, Article 2. Changes to Article 4, general site development standards to adopt development standards for clothing collection donation bins, allow for the use of shipping containers as principal and accessory structures for certain uses, and expand the parking exempt area within downtown Lakeland north, south, and east of Lake Mirror, north of West Main Street, south of Lake Wire, and south of Orange Street. Applicant, City of Lakeland.
Good morning. Again, for the record, I'm Philip Scarish, Principal Planner with Community and Economic Development. Few amendments to start with Article 4 of the Land Development Code. We'll start with a collection of donation bins. As you can see, these have kind of proliferated all over the city. Sometimes they'll pop up overnight, often without owner's consent. And they can turn, as this picture, see in the picture that, it'll turn into blight. And these are, they locate them in parking lots, generally in the front of a business. And then trash and things just collect up around it. There's no schedule for cleanup, and it's been a very challenging for our code enforcement staff to enforce regulations for these, because we don't have any regulations for donation bins. So that's what they've suggested, that we've put create some standards in our land development code for these collection bins, so they can have something to cite owners or collection bin operators. So what we're looking at them as what zoning districts we allow them in. We have locational criteria, size and quantity, and then we have performance standards. Along with the general provisions, we set the zoning districts up where they would be allowed. That would be the O3, C2, C4, C5, I1 zoning districts, and then within a PUD or a CUP, if that was allowed within that PUD or CUP, if the applicant specifies that. It shall be the responsibility of the owner of the property on which bin is placed to ensure that all items are disposed within the donation bin. We have standards for height, a maximum height of 7 feet, width of 6 feet, and a maximum depth of 6 feet as well. No more than 2 donation bins shall be permitted per premises. It shall not be located in required front yards or street side yards, or within 5 feet of any parcel boundary and 10 feet from any overhead utilities. The placement of clothing collection bins shall not interfere with the operation of any access drives, maneuver aisles, impede the access to any required off-street parking spaces. or pedestrian facilities, and they should not be located within any easements or block access to any designated fire lanes and building entrance exits. As far as the performance standards, we've listed 5 performance standards. They shall be maintained in good condition at all time with no visible structure damage, corrosion, or graffiti. The name of the operator and the owner shall be placed on the bins, contact numbers and things like that. The donation bin shall be designed such that only the owner and the operator of the bin can remove the contents. The donation bin shall be collected on a regular basis, but no less than once every 7 calendar days. And donation bins shall not be permitted or to be disposed of outside. Donation items shall not be permitted to be deposited or stored outside the donation bin. So you can see this gives some teeth to our code enforcement staff, so it gives them something that they can enforce on a regular basis, because right now they have nothing. It's, they need some guidelines and, something that they can, hang their site, their regulations on, so they can cite property owners and or bin operators. So that is the donation bins. We're also looking at an amendment for, we've had a big push in the last five years for shipping containers and their reuse. So we're expanding the use of shipping containers within the city, defining them. Get my notes here, excuse me. We got a new definition for shipping container: a large standardized container designed for intermodal transport of goods and materials that is without wheels and a vehicle chassis. And there are numerous performance standards, but I'm just going to just give you the brief highlights of one. So we will allow them in as residential uses and commercial. So I'll start with residential. So with a conditional use permit, we would allow these containers to be retrofitted for residential purposes within multifamily zoning districts as a conditional use permit, not a permitted use outright. They would have to be on a permanent foundation, and obviously they would need to meet the Florida building code. We also have design standards in the amendment as well to have certain materials and things like that, so it doesn't look like a shipping container when it's done. It'll be finished and look more like a residential dwelling. And then we also allow them in mobile home parks as well, with Florida building code standards. As for commercial purposes, they would need to be on a permanent foundation and comply with the Florida building code. So what types of uses? Small-scale restaurants with fresh foods or products are prepared on site and sold directly to consumers for either on-premise or off-premise consumption. Small-scale specialty retail sales of antiques, fresh packed and prepared foods, clothing, cosmetic clothing, gifts, toys, books, jewelry, small electronics, flowers, arts and crafts, indoor hydroponic production of fruits and vegetables, and other uses not specifically listed and allowed by the Community Economic Development Director. And again, we have performance standards for those and locational standards for those accessory structures as well. And then finally, we are expanding the parking exempt area within the city. Currently, this is the area in red here. This is our existing parking exempt area in red. The blue area would be the areas we are extending them. So we're bringing them out past the Lake Mirror area out. This would be South Lake, and where Main Street is right here, almost out to the 98 corridor there. So we're expanding our parking exempt area. There's no text change to this, just this map. So we're adding 83.4 acres to the parking exempt area. I think it was a total of 170 acres total. Yeah, 176 acres total for the proposed change. So this would, any new commercial uses, multifamily uses in this area, they would be exempt from the city's parking standards. They would still have to meet our landscape standards and buffering. If you had a small office going next to, to residential use, they would have to meet, our landscape, but they are exempt from the total number of spaces. So that basically wraps up this series of amendments. I'll stand for any questions you may have.
I have a question. With regards to these bins for donations, did I hear you correctly that you said that sometimes these bins are placed without the permission of the property owner?
Yes, they are.
Okay, so what we have decided here, that the property owner, even though they have not given permission for this, are going to be responsible for keeping the area picked up and cleaned, correct?
Correct, yeah. This would it basically would give the property owner some teeth as well to say, hey, I didn't want this bin here. Code enforcement, please come and cite this operator, and they can remove that as well. So it's in the benefit of the owners as well. But yeah, if a property owner and a bin operator got together and said, yes, you can have a bin and it meets city's codes, we'll do that. But yes, the owners could be cited as well as the bin operator. So it just gives more teeth for the owners to have these bin operators be more accountable.
Well, I'm confused. If the person who owns the property has not approved that these bins are put there, if we don't put some kind of a regulation in there that they have to have approval of the property owner, how in the world can we possibly enforce code enforcement if it looks like the picture did up here,
Right,
if they've never given permission?
Right, that's been our dilemma, is because they come up. So in this case, you have to have a bin, a donation bin operator can't, with these new regulations, they can't just show up on somebody's parcel. So we can just have that removed.
Okay, where I guess I missed it then when I was reading what was in here. Is there a portion that says that they cannot place these bins without permission of the property owner?
My question is, do they need a permit do they apply for a permit to even place them anywhere? And would that permit require an owner's agreement to put it there?
So there's no proposal for a permit to be required. So this is intended to establish the standards so that when there is an issue, then the city has some requirements that they can cite in terms of a violation. And typically with violations, it is sent to the property owner, because in the end, the property owner is the one that's responsible for the maintenance of their overall property. So in this instance, if someone has placed a bin on a property and they don't have the consent of the owner, then it's the owner's responsibility to have those bins removed if they don't want them on their property.
Wow.
That's
And you've
putting a lot
also
of
got in
onus
here
on the owner.
that the only people that are allowed to empty it are the owners. Who's going to enforce that?
Yeah.
Who's going to enforce somebody pulling into a parking lot, and saying, well, we're going to empty this out? Is that the owner's responsibility also?
It's the owner's responsibility, the property owner's responsibility to make sure that their property is maintained in accordance with these standards. So if there is a bin there that shouldn't be there, that they don't want it on that property, they will have to notify the operator of the collection bin and have it removed. And so one of the requirements is that the bins will have to have contact information for the operator on it. And if it doesn't, then it's in violation of these standards.
I guess-
So that the owner seems to be placed on the owner, whether they've given permission or not.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Sure, and again, that's because, typically with any other type of requirement throughout the city where there is code enforcement ability to take action, you always have to notice the owner of the property because they are the ones responsible for the maintenance of the property.
But does the owner have the ability at the very beginning to say, no, I don't want a bin on my property?
Yes.
Yes.
And if they don't remove it, then what happens? If the owner of the bin says, I'm not going to remove it, is it a civil suit at that point?
Yeah, and a property owner always has the right to exclude others from their property. So, I mean, that, you know, they would have a variety of remedies to be able to get the bin removed if they didn't want it there. And the city's land development code doesn't need to acknowledge or create those things because they already exist as just part of your rights as a property owner.
But it also, just like he said, it puts the onus on the owner to invest finances and time and resource to abide by the code when they did not give permission for this to start out with.
It does. It says it shall be the responsibility of the owner on the property in which the bin is placed to ensure that all items are deposited within the donation bin. That's what the proposed language is.
But at the very beginning, if that bin could be placed on the property, even though the owner has not given permission.
Or conversely, they have given permission
Okay,
and they need to ensure that it's
But
kept up in accordance with these standards.
but is it made clear to them that if they give permission, what their responsibilities are then?
Yes, their responsibilities would to make sure that these standards are complied with.
I guess it might be a dumb question, but for donation boxes, why aren't permits required to put them on? I mean, that would be the first line of defense. You know, they would have to go put a little skin in the game by paying for a permit and getting those things approved, saying, I'm going to put it here. The owner has already agreed. We've agreed to all these terms. Here's $50. I mean, I don't know.
So for one thing, these don't require a building permit. So there is no permit to be issued. And even in that instance, you would still have people that wouldn't go through that process. They would just place the bins on the property anyway. And we'd still be in the same situation and because these are movable, that's why it's the property owner that's ultimately responsible.
If a permit is required, they would have to meet the Florida Building Code standards, and that would be considered basically at that time a permanent structure. They would have to be engineered somehow that it would become a permanent structure that would meet the wind code load, criteria of the city of the building code. Some cities do that; they require permits. Some don't. I mean, we wanted to go the route that just make it as less procedural or for a property owner, but still have some teeth for our code enforcement to enforce.
I mean, they're basically the solid waste collection bins that they use for traditional trash pickup. So they're not structures. They're not anything that requires engineering or otherwise. They're very mobile.
See, I think this is a great start, but I think we've all said, it puts the onus on the owner of the property who may or may not have given permission. And as long as we have to have the address and contact information of the owner of the bin, I'm saying that if the city is not going to put some kind of pressure on these people to not be putting these bins on private property, then they have to be responsible for these bins.
Well, this is the pressure.
Yeah.
This sets up standards where currently there aren't any standards. So now it will be known as time goes on and we are able to now cite those that are in violation, then they will know that they need to meet these standards. So today there are no standards and we have no ability to regulate these other than when there is overflowing bins, then that does become an issue that can be cited. But there are instances where these are placed in parking spaces, for example. We need to make sure they're not placed there. And I don't know that in most cases there isn't owner consent. I would say that there's probably a lot of instances where there is owner consent, but this makes it a level playing field for both situations. And again, the property owner has to be responsible for whatever is on their property.
And I agree with that. At some point in the future, if these standards are enacted and there's still an issue, can the standards be strengthened at some point down the road?
Yes. So, we probably should have started off with an introduction here on why we're doing all of these amendments to begin with. So the land development code changes over time, and it changes in response to, either some issue that we see consistently where we can see that we should make a modification to the code, or if there are changing technologies, like for example, the shipping containers. People weren't using shipping containers 20 years ago like they are today, so that's why we're bringing those amendments forward. So yes, we are proposing changes now, and we can make changes in the future if we see that it's not working. This is a first step to try to provide some parameters on these on these collection bins, because we've heard from members of the community that these are unsightly. So this is our attempt to get those bins to come into conformance with some minimum standards.
Just so I'm clear on one thing. Bottom line, if I want to put a bin on Mr. Roberts' property, he still has to give permission, or no bin appears. Is that correct? So if he is not given permission, nobody can put a bin.
Well, I think the permission question isn't really addressed by the proposed ordinance. It's just going to put the ultimate burden is going to be on the property owner to make sure that if there is a bin on the property, if they don't want it there, then obviously that's their private property right to get rid of it. But if they do have it there, they allow it there, then they're going to have to make sure that these standards are met, that donated items aren't piling up and looking like trash, piled up in a parking lot. And I guess it's worth mentioning too that even if you own property, because the code enforcement regime, the regulatory regime, the way that's set up, whenever you go through code enforcement, that order from the code enforcement board becomes a lien against the property where the violation occurred. And that would happen even if you say you owned a vacant lot and people like to dump tires on your lot. You had nothing to do with it. It wasn't your permission to do. But if the city's unable to identify that person who was illegally dumping those tires, the city would cite that property owner for leaving those tires on the property and maintaining a property in that condition. So that's the remedy that we have under the code enforcement statute. And this is kind of a similar type scenario. The only difference is that the intention of the donation box is to collect the items and then disperse them to charity. I don't think it's the intention most of the time for trash to pile up, but that's occasionally what does happen. So because it's a little bit different than the accumulation of junk and trash and what we would ordinarily think of that as, that's why this ordinance would help code enforcement. But we can obviously make some changes to the proposed language if the board feels that there's some inadequacy to it.
So if ABC Charity puts a collection box on his property, he doesn't give permission, does he go to the city? Does he have to go to ABC Charity and tell them to remove it? What are the remedies for the property owner?
To get rid of it? I mean, it would probably be worth calling the person who placed it there and asking them to remove it. And then if they didn't, then, it would be on the property owner to call a junk removal company or something like that. I mean, if somebody came to your property and placed something in your front yard, you don't typically need to go to court in order to get that item out of your front yard. So I don't think it would be any different than that. Obviously, the facts of the situation, every little fact could be important. If there had been some kind of verbal conversation between the property owner and the charity operator, that may have been some kind of agreement, those things could complicate the situation. But the city doesn't really want to get involved in any of that.
Well, but it's my experience seeing these bins around town that generally they're placed in shopping center parking lots and places like that. And a lot of times these shopping center owners, they don't even reside in this area. They wouldn't see it. It's the people who lease space for the individual businesses or stores. And, you know, the owner's going to be the one getting cited by the city if that thing doesn't get collected and trash is allowed to pick up around it. I think what they're all saying is that whoever the company is or the individual or the organization that places these bins, there should be some mechanism or process in place through the city that they have to have approval to place it in that parking lot.
So
At the very least, permission from the owner of the property.
In writing,
Yeah.
then that would leave who is going to verify that?
yeah.
Yeah.
Who verifies
But
that?
the owner of the property, and it gives him some credibility with a complaint, because the only way you're going to get rid of that is through legal action.
Well, in the
If
case-
somebody says, I'm not going to remove my bin, and you have to leave it there, what is the option for the owner? I own rental property. If somebody throws trash on it, I haul it out to the street, and the city picks it up. Can they push these bins out to the curb and expect the city to pick them up if it's not?
But even if you had a written agreement between the owner of the property and the operator of the bin, and then the operator of the bin decided, I'm not going to keep it up anymore, you have an agreement in place between the owner and the operator, and if the operator decides not to fulfill his duties, then that onus is really on the owner because he agreed to let that happen. So I
And
kind of
Exactly,
see where
so that's
that,
why
The
that's.
property
what
owner is
you're
going to be the
doing.
one getting cited by code enforcement and incurring fees. Then they have to incur the fees to have the stuff hauled away. That's not cheap.
Well, let me clarify that this is happening today. So these bins that are overflowing today, property owners are being cited. And then it is the responsibility of the property owner to have those items removed or to call the operator and have them removed. They have, at the time that they're cited, they're not automatically incurring fines. So they have some time to come into compliance, to be able to work with the operators to make sure that these bins are brought into compliance.
I mean, we could certainly, take a look at, I mean, I guess I can't really speak for staff and what they propose for this, but there's no legal prohibition on, applying the standards to both owner and operator of the bin. While I did say earlier that the lien typically goes against the property, that's why 99 out of 100 times, and the owner is the one who's cited in code enforcement, but there are occasional situations where a non-owner of a property, like a contractor, for example, may be cited for a violation in code enforcement. So there's no legal prohibition why we couldn't say, anytime we say owner, we could also say operator. And then both parties would be equally responsible for complying with the standards. And then in that type of situation, code enforcement would have the discretion to decide who the more appropriate party was based on their investigation and whatever information came to light. And that might be a way of addressing your concern if the owner doesn't have permission, or if the operator doesn't have permission, they could tell code enforcement and they could go after the operator as opposed to the owner of the property. It would complicate the code enforcement process.
Which again is why the contact information is being required on the bins.
yeah. I like the contact information because there's so many bins that, I've seen bins that were trashy and that have been removed. Right now, I passed one in the mall parking lot and it's so far away from the building that no one's probably even noticing it unless you're going through and picking through the stuff. So maybe a phone number definitely would help, so you can call the operator and say, hey, this is what's happening with your box. Come get it.
And
like
I
the
think
contact
the
idea.
bin operators, the good and the bad ones. They know around the state of Florida who has codes in place and who doesn't. And if a city doesn't, like we do not, they will take advantage. And that's why we are seeing these. And if they know that they are going to be, have violations on them if they go into a city with standards, then I think they're a little more careful. So I think this is going to help a lot in that respect.
It is going to help a lot, but I don't know that those operators are going to look at that standard and think, oh, that's not enough to deter me to put it there. I don't know that there's enough of a standard, so.
And we're not asking for final approval of this today. This is just public hearing, and then we're going to come back with a recommendation
I like
next
the
month.
idea.
So we've heard the concern. I think what Jared has suggested, we can put equal responsibility in the standards for both owner and operator to maintain these items in accordance with the standards.
I have a couple questions. First one is, it says the bins shall not be located in required front or side yard. What's the thought there? Is that it has to be on the back side of the parcel? This is B, 4.3.8.4.
Right. Shall not be located within required front or street side yards or within 5 feet of any parcel boundary. So that would be basically forced to an interior side or a rear, depending on how the parcel is oriented.
What about existing facilities today that have a bin that operates in good condition, regularly cleaned out, but it's on the front side just because of ease of access for recovery of stuff? Are we expecting them to move it based on this language?
Yeah, I'll have to ask Jared. There's no grandfathering provisions in this code. So if this gets adopted, the existing bins will need to be fixed.
The only thing I would say to that is normally that's what you call it grandfathering or non-conforming use. I mean, what the courts say about that is that just to use the legal part, is that the law abhors forfeitures, and so and what that means is that the presumption is in favor of maintaining a property right, and the reason why we have non-conformity is because the Constitution says that whenever you take away property from a private person, you have to compensate them for that. And so in order for the government to be able to change land development regulations without having to pay money to property owners every time they take a property right away, we recognize grandfathered uses and nonconformities. Whether or not, how that would apply to this particular ordinance, I would be a little reluctant to give you a definitive opinion on today. But my gut reaction would be that they would be allowed to stay as non-conforming uses, or the city may end up having to, pay people to remove them or bring them into compliance. That would be the worst case scenario, or at minimum we may end up in litigation over a donation bin, which there has been litigation over donation bins. Surprisingly enough, there's been federal litigation over donation bins, and federal courts have recognized them as protected by the First Amendment. So because they are charitable solicitations of charity, which is a First Amendment activity. And so that I don't think anything that we're doing in this ordinance is going to run afoul of some of that case law, but it's just something to keep in mind. For example, if we did implement a permit scheme for these, we would be requiring a permit to engage in First Amendment activity. So it would be something that we'd have to take a really close look at. Sorry, that was a long legal rant there, but yes, I think they would probably be non-conforming, but I would want to take an extra look at that.
I have one more question. Forgive me, can you please explain what the parking exempt means? What exactly does that mean? What is it exempt from? what's, like I was,
The downtown core, that's the historic core primarily around One Park. C6, C7. We do not mandate parking there because we want to have a more denser pedestrian-oriented type development pattern. Historically, that area developed parking. So we don't require parking for a majority of downtown to encourage that type of development pattern. Does that make sense?
So we're taking that parking away, is that correct?
No, we're
But
not taking anything away. Basically, what's going to happen is that if I say I want to build an office, and anywhere else in the city, I would have to accommodate an area on my site for parking. That's going to eat into my development site. This basically gives property owner greater flexibility with the placement and the size of their structure, because they don't have to have a parking lot on their property, because it has to be on off-street parking has to be on somebody's property. So in those cases, they maximize the district setbacks. They maximize floor area ratio, and like as Matt was saying, we want a more dense urban area in this area of the city to because there's surface parking, there's street parking, those things like that. So and like I said, this area just was developed historically without any parking criteria. That said, if they voluntarily provide parking, then they need to meet the landscaping criteria. Again, like if I was developing an office or some type of small commercial use, and next door to me, as it occurs many times in this area that you have a residential use, they would have to still provide the buffering that's required there. This is just a parking exempt, just excludes the number of spaces that's required, or parking at all.
And we also, in that town, we have shared parking, we have multiple public parking lots, garages.
Right.
The idea being that people, when they go downtown, they park once and go to different places, so every business does not have to have their own parking. And if you understand how to develop historic buildings, and if you say have a 3,000 square foot historic building, and you want to do a retail use under the original code, they would be required to provide 10 off-street parking spaces, and that's just not practical. You don't have the land without tearing down more historic buildings. And you quickly realize it's unfeasible if you want to maintain that character, to have that type of feel there. So we don't mandate parking for that reason. We want to preserve that, protect that character, and encourage that type of development and economic activity.
now it makes sense. Thank you.
What drove these limits specifically? Is it just an overview of the existing development that's going on, or what drove these specific limits?
Basically, the recent expansion of activity around Lake Mira and the infill multifamily, we've had several large apartment complexes that popped up recently. The area north of Lake Mira.
I'm so sorry. Would you mind standing at the podium?
Is this mic not working?
Would you mind standing at the podium? I'm so sorry, but that microphone I just can't get it to turn on.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Recently, we've had several infill multifamily projects. We've had the Meriton Apartments north of the police station, Lake Mira. We have several around the south side of Lake Mira, around Lake and Lime Avenue and Orange Avenue there. So as you get more of that population coming on board there, you have much more demand. People locally, they're going to be able to walk to those uses there. They're not going to have to drive everywhere like that. So we have already the zoning in place around Lake Mira on the south and east sides there on Orange and Lake Avenue. We allow for mixed-use development. We allow for small-scale commercial, restaurants, retail, and residential if they want to there. But a lot of the times, particularly when you're dealing with older historic structures, if you have a historic home and they want to do like a restaurant, retail use there, they're not going to be able to fit like 10 or 15 parking spaces on the site. It's just not going to be feasible. So we'd rather have people drive to Peggy Brown, drive to the Magnolia Building, wherever, and walk over there. But not really require that, because it's not going to work. Otherwise, you're not going to get that kind of character you want there.
So under current exempt area, if someone were to come in with a development, could they request an exemption outside of those limits, or if they're just outside, they have to provide the parking?
I mean, currently, if they're outside there, they have to meet the standard requirements. So if we're now, the zoning allows those uses, but parking is holding those things back. It's what's really keeping that from happening.
We do have an administrative adjustment process for those properties that are located outside of the parking exempt area, and they can seek a reduction in the number of required parking spaces if they're providing some type of alternative design, if there's tree preservation involved, if there's transit availability or bicycle facilities that are provided. So yes, this is intended to make it easier to encourage development in this section of the Garden District without them having to go through that administrative adjustment process.
And the reality is they will provide some amount of parking. They do typically have employees and other things, and they are required to at least provide one ADA accessible parking space. So they will have some parking available. But the question is what's appropriate for the context and for the what we want to see developed there.
Thank you.
I've got one last question on the shipping container stuff, just because, I mean, the only thing I've seen in my package is the one change on 4.3.1. Is there additional language?
Yes, it's actually on LDC 21003. We're to get that further later on. So Philip touched on some things that are in there. The actual development standards are more specific. So I'll go into that further later on during my presentation.
Okay.
Yeah, we grouped these by article, and some of these items have standards across articles, or a definition in one and then a standard in the next. So we probably should have put those together in the presentation, but yes, will be some additional clarification on that.
Okay.
Any other questions? Any questions from the audience? At this point, I don't believe the board takes any action on this at this time.
That's correct. This is just public hearing, and we'll come back next month with a recommendation based on your comments.
Item 3, changes to Article 9, subdivision standards, and Article 13, non-conformities to address subdivision review and platting requirements. Adopt standards for splitting lots and parcels and allow for the development of non-conforming lots under certain conditions. Applicant, City of Lakeland.
Good morning. For the record, Joshua Chain with Community and Economic Development. As the slide above indicates, we are proposing some changes to Article 9, which is our subdivision regulations, as well as Article 13 as it relates to non-conforming uses. The first proposal regards a new subsection, which will be identified as 9.41.4, and that will be a new subsection regarding subdivision review and platting requirements, and it will read, any division of a lot, parcel, or tract of land that includes the construction of new roads, drainage facilities, wetland impacts, or floodplain mitigation, or reconstruction of any of these facilities shall be reviewed by the subdivision review team and may require both construction plan review and plat review. And what this will do is this will help provide clarity within our existing land development regulations to landowners, property owners, consultants, and developers. This provides very clear language explaining, particularly with some of these smaller pieces of land, that when these changes are proposed, that they must go through subdivision review. The next new subsection will address splitting and combining of existing lots and parcels. We do allow for that. This would be lots or parcels that do not have wetlands or floodplain issues, or there's no new infrastructure required. They can go through the process that's already provided. You can see the form here up above by the Polk County Property Appraiser's Office, and they will be, as they apply for that, they will be required to submit a survey, which will show all the existing conditions on the site, lot and parcel splits which result in the creation of nonconformities in respect to the setbacks for principal and accessory structures, orientation of the required front and rear yards, and the location of required off-street parking shall be prohibited. Again, that's part of the reason why we're requiring a boundary survey. We want to see the property lines, we want to see the existing conditions on the site, and we don't want to be approving any type of split. Again, this is not a formal subdivision review, but we don't want to be approving a split that would create additional or new nonconformities. Lot and parcel splits which result in the separation of any required off-street parking, driveway aprons, or other facilities serving a principal structure on the property shall not proceed until facilities have been reconstructed in accordance with the current land development code standards. And that's in regards to driveway aprons. Again, we don't want to create new nonconformities or new problems for a future property owner. Any encroaching structures on the newly created lot or parcel shall be removed or relocated. And that has to do with particularly existing outbuildings or accessory structures. Often what you'll see when someone is splitting parcels within a recorded subdivision that, let's say that were developed 30 or 40 years ago, that there may be a shed or a outbuilding or detached garage. Again, we don't allow, what we don't want to do is create new nonconformities. The city already has regulations prohibiting lots without a principal structure. So again, that would be nonconformity if we allowed someone to split the property and then all of a sudden you have a shed on there, but no principal structure. Lastly, in Article 9, we're proposing subsection 9.8.4.4, and this will identify additional requirements for splitting and combining lots and parcels in existing subdivisions, and it will read this. Sorry, I wanted to make sure I was in the right section here. The splitting and combining of lots and parcels in existing subdivisions shall maintain the lot orientation and block pattern as shown on the recorded subdivision plat. The creation of any new lots or parcels which are oriented contrary to the orientation of lots shown on the recorded plat shall be prohibited. Any new lots and parcels created shall not restrict access to any existing above ground or below ground utilities, alleys, easements, pedestrian facilities, and solid waste collection areas. And again, this is to refine the process that exists now so that when we are getting these requests, particularly for these small one-time lot splits, that they're maintaining the existing lot and block pattern. We are seeing, particularly in some of our historic districts, where you may have a home that was built on 2 lots, or in some cases, 2 lots in a portion, if you look at the legal description of another lot. And what they're wanting to do is lot line adjustments that don't necessarily follow the pattern that existed prior to that. That's a concern to many of the neighbors, again, particularly in some of our historic neighborhoods and historic districts. So we're trying to beef up the language to help prevent that and provide for a smooth, orderly process as it relates to new lot splits, which in many cases you already have lots of record. It's just that they're going to split them. That request goes to the property appraiser's office, and then they assign a new parcel ID, and then those are not available for redevelopment. Lastly, in Article 13, and that is our chapter that addresses nonconformities, we have a new subsection 13.4.2.4 regarding development of nonconforming lots permitted, and essentially we want to allow for development of nonconforming lots when the parcels are comprised of 1 or more lots of legally recorded or which were legally created or recorded prior to July 18th, 1950. In addition, we have issues as it relates to nonconformity. We have parcels that are substandard because of a result of a taking. So we want to allow for some of those parcels that are within 10% of the dimensional standards that we have currently in our zoning regulations to be developed. Again, the purpose of this is to allow for additional infill and new redevelopment so that there's more housing opportunities here in the city. And I think cleaning up this language will accomplish that. So with that, I will stand for any questions you may have.
Questions from the board?
Just one question on the last one. You say recorded prior to 1950. What about properties that were annexed by the city after that that might be non-conforming? Are there any deviations or considerations for those?
Yes, this would apply to lots of record that were created per the 1950, even if they were done in the county. We do have an example of that today up in the Robson Street, Kavas area that was extended about 20 years ago. There is an older subdivision there that was platted in, I believe, 1915. A lot of the lots have some issues and other things going on there. So it's really dealing with vested development rights, actual subdivisions that were platted and improved. It would not apply to the paper subdivisions. If you're familiar with like River Ranch, Lehigh Acres, things that were only existed on paper only, would not apply to those things, the ones that don't have any actual roads or infrastructure. So the ones that do actually have roads, utilities that were built, it would apply to those.
Matt, do you want to explain the magic behind the date of July 18th, 1950?
Yes, and that date for future reference, that's when the first zoning code was adopted by the city. So prior to that time, it was the Wild West. You could do whatever you wanted, record anything. So that's why we have the date in the code there.
Which exists today, so this is building off that language that's in the code today.
Yes, we currently have that provision already in the code there. So this is what allows a lot of the older neighborhoods. We have certain parts that have platted lots or maybe 40 by 90. I mean, they're very small, but they're actually they're vested lots. And if we didn't have this provision, they basically sit there vacant for years. There's no way to actually make any good use of them. So we have seen renewed interest by investors, builders, other people, and developing those lots. So this is what's going to encourage development in those older areas.
Any other questions? Anything from the audience?
Item 4, changes to Article 2, permitted uses, and Article 5, standards for specific uses, to adopt development standards allowing for the use of shipping containers as dwelling units in mobile homes and multifamily zoning districts, and as accessory structures for certain commercial uses. Amend standards to home-based businesses in response to recent legislative changes. Clarify parking standards for boats, trailers, and RVs on residential property, and revise standards and terminology pertaining to personal wireless facilities in limited development zoning districts. Applicant, City of Lakeland.
Okay, and for the record, Matthew Lenz, Community and Economic Development. So this is a more sort of detailed overview of what Philip Scarce touched on earlier, as far as the new provisions for the allowance of shipping containers as accessory structures for certain commercial uses, and also for new uses, dwelling units in certain areas like mobile home parks and multifamily, which I'll go through briefly here. Basically, this section, we actually adopt the development standards for using these structures here. And what we're proposing is twofold. For small-scale entrepreneurs, startups, we want to allow them to be used as restaurants, food stalls on properties that are already improved. So they would not be vacant lots. There would not be someone just going out there and buying a vacant piece of property and putting one down. They would already have to have another use on the property, and they could do this as an accessory use. So if you have a property owner, for example, he wants to sublease part of his property for this type of activity, it would be permitted here, but we would have certain design standards that would require approval, consistency with that. So we want these to look like commercial structures, not just an industrial container. So they would have to make certain modifications, architecturally windows, awnings, landscaping, lighting, paint color, signage, stuff like that. And then if you've been around the country recently, there are a lot of really sort of cool, attractive examples of these types of structures that have been used for that purpose. And they're a really sort of low-cost way for people to start up and get a new business established. And so that use would be limited to basically restaurants, food stalls, and retail. At some point, if we want to expand that, we would consider it, but initially that's what we're looking at here. And the second part here would be for the shipping containers as dwelling units. This would be through the conditional use process. It would not be rights, so they would have to come here to this board for approval. And that would be primarily in mobile home parks, new mobile home parks, for example, or multifamily zoning districts if a developer wanted to do something creative. Recently, we did take a tour of a company down in Wauchula that's actually manufacturing this housing. That first slide at the top is an example of a project, I believe, in St. Petersburg that's underway currently for a 27-unit multifamily structure, where they combine the containers to create an actual 2-story building. So that would be like a multifamily apartment example. In other cases, they've used them for individual units, like small studio apartments. They range anywhere from, I believe, 20 by 8, so 160 to 320 square feet. That would be a typical 20 to 40 foot intermodal container. But obviously they can be combined. If you have an engineer come in and they cut them apart and put them back together, you can create something larger, a bigger assembly there. And the next section here, we touch on, it deals with home businesses. The Florida legislature recently prohibited local governments' ability to regulate home businesses. Our previous regulations, we really limited the scale, the uses that could be allowed here. Now the state has basically stepped in and said, no, we can no longer do that. So only thing we can really address now are things like parking, performance standards like noise, odors, buffering, but we can't regulate the actual use. So if someone wants to do home auto repair, if they want to do like a funeral home, and they can basically do anything they want now under the new laws here, and we don't really have any control over that. The only thing we can do is address the impacts. And so the changes we have in your packet, we basically struck through the old requirements and referenced the statutory requirements as far as those items that we can regulate now. So this one may be a little confusing, but that's basically what we're doing there. And we're also clarifying language addressing the parking of boats, trailers, RVs, residential property. This is section 5.17. Essentially, we're closing a loophole. We had a recent code enforcement case where someone was arguing that under the current language, you could park in the front yard as long as it wasn't in front of the actual house. Then that was never the intent. So we want to clarify that. We don't want it in front or street side yards, period. It needs to be in the backyard or the side yard. So that's what we're addressing here. And we also have language in the code. We're doing housekeeping for the personal wireless facilities. The current code refers to the old RC, rural conservation. That was the previous designation for the LD district. That was changed several years back, and for some reason, when the new code was adopted, that was never corrected. So we're just correcting that reference there to properly refer to the LD district. And as you've seen, we've had several cell towers recently that come through there, and that's why that's in the packet. And I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions from the board?
The shipping containers to be used for accessory dwelling units, is any of that going to be addressed for, like if you wanted to put one in your backyard for your mother-in-law, or is that part of that package, or?
No, that's not currently part of that package. We haven't really had any of those mostly what we see with the ADUs are either conversions of existing structures like detached garages, or people that want to build new. And I think part of that is the residential building code, the energy efficiency, other things. We haven't really seen anyone for single family ask for those yet. I mean, certainly, if you look at it, it's really more of a structural material, and it can be modified. You can have siding, you can do other treatments, things that really make it look like a residential structure. And that's always been our main concern with the ADUs, is that they actually, they maintain the character of the single family home that's there, that they fit in with the context. So we probably wouldn't want some modern industrial looking structure unless the house itself were more like that. And we haven't really, anyone to date actually apply or ask for that. So it's not been something we've had on our radar.
But if they did, so accessory dwelling units do require a compatibility review through this board. And so if we had a homeowner come in and propose that, as long as they are utilizing it in conformance with the Florida Building Code, and as Matt said, the structure would be compatible in appearance to the principal dwelling unit, then that could be considered through that process.
Okay, yeah, that's because we have had some that came before the board, but it was traditional construction, and I thought, I was thinking because this is maybe a lower cost option, that might come up in the future. That's the only reason for my question.
Yeah, mostly what we've seen in the past were people that just want to buy them and use them as sheds. They just want to buy a cheap one, pop it down, make no changes, and store stuff in it. And that we do not allow. So.
Any other questions? Questions from the audience?
Item 5, changes to Article 5, standards for specific uses, to revise development standards for new mobile home parks to allow a smaller development site area, smaller lot sizes, and greater density as a conditional use. Allow for the use of shipping containers as dwelling units in new and existing mobile home parks as a conditional use, and allow for the use of tiny home RVs in recreational vehicle parks and spaces designated for recreational vehicles in existing mobile home parks. Applicant, City of Lakeland.
Okay, this next section addresses primarily mobile home parks. A few years back, we updated the language to address the replacement of mobile homes in non-conforming parks. Those would be the parks that typically they were annexed in. They were older parks. They were done maybe in the 50s or 60s, and they were non-conforming in terms of our standards, typically the number of units, layout. And when we brought them in, we didn't give them mobile home zoning. We gave them single family. Again, an example would be the Robson and Crevasse Street area in North Lakeland that we brought in 20 years ago. There are a lot of older parks there. Some of them are maybe 10 or 15 units, but they're really not comparable to the modern parks, and they don't conform with any of the standards. So when we brought them in, essentially we gave them something that did not allow them to ever expand or grow or be replaced. And a few years ago, we attempted to clarify that, and essentially it was going to result in a attrition in which once they removed mobile homes or they were vacant for a period of time, they couldn't replace them. But we did have some issues with that approach here. We actually found out it was maybe encouraging that they keep these older units, some of them which go back, they're 50 years or more older. They're extremely substandard. Instead of actually replacing them with newer units, they were doing the opposite. So this would address that problem there. And so we would, through conditional use, allow them to replace units, but they would have to be newer. They would have to be probably a minimum of at least no more than 10 years old. And we would also require other improvements, update the park, clean up the landscaping, buffering, driveways, stuff like that. So we're trying to address that issue there. And I think the top here, we have kind of a photo. This would be one of the older parks. And this is a more kind of newer, modern park here. And the second part of this is the current standards we have been in place probably since the early 90s, and they are very inflexible, and as a result, we have not really seen a new park in probably about 30 years. Currently, if you want to go out and establish a new mobile home park, not only do you have to have the zoning, but you have to have a minimum, I think, development site of 20 acres, which is actually very hard to find and rare nowadays. So we want to allow for the opportunity to develop smaller sites when they're adjacent to other property zoned for mobile home park uses. I know we had a property here recently off of West Ariana that was surrounded by mobile home parks, but it didn't meet that requirement, so it could not be developed for that purpose. So this would allow those type of properties to be used for that purpose. And also we want to allow for potentially greater density, smaller development sites, if they want to propose more innovative dwelling types. There's several more modern types of units out there. We have some photos here. And so we would consider that through conditional use when they want to propose that type of construction. And lastly, this is kind of a response to a more recent trend. We do want to allow for tiny home type of RVs. These will be the towable dwellings on the trailers down there. So this change would allow for those uses in RV parks and on designated RV pads within existing mobile home parks. Under the Florida Building Code, those are technically RVs, so we would allow for those uses. And I'll stand for any questions.
A lot of these mobile home parks, the individuals who are living in them, don't they basically have land leases, the owner of the overall property?
Correct.
So the owner of the overall property still has the right not to say, no, we don't want any shipping containers used as homes here. Is that correct?
Correct. I mean, it would be the owner of the property ultimately that would determine what they want to do there.
So it doesn't affect the property owner's rights at all?
Correct.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Item 6, changes to Article 3, urban form standards to amend design standards to attached garages or single-family and two-family uses in response to recent legislative changes. Applicant, City of Lakeland.
Good morning again for the record. My name is Philip Scarce, Principal Planner with Community Economic Development. Right, as Matt and you alluded to in the title of this ordinance change, that there is recent legislation, specifically House Bill 401, which amends Chapter 163, which is the state's growth management implementing tool, basically through provisions of the state. The regulations relate to building design elements from being applied to certain dwellings. And in this case, there was a little provision attached in their definitions, which affects our code, and that is the location and placement of garages. And that building design element, which is defined, is that which defines the location or orientation of a garage. And what that does is, with the exception of PUDs and historic districts, we can't regulate the orientation and placement of the garage. So what we're proposing is, do we have this slide. Currently within our urban neighborhood districts, garages are required to be placed 5 feet behind the front facade of a principal structure. And within the suburban corridor, garagements shall be placed no further than 15 from the front facade for the purpose of measuring distance shall be living area. So basically, it's that old term we used to use back in the early 2000s called snout houses. I'm not sure if it's still around anymore, where you don't want to have the majority of the front of the house as being a garage that protrudes into that front yard, creating monotony. And you see all these residential subdivisions that you just drive down the street, all you see is just garage, 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 garage. So that was the intent when we designed these standards, but now with this legislation, we can't regulate the placement of garages. So what we're proposing in the urban corridor is attached garages shall be limited to no more than 50% of an overall width of the front elevation, or a maximum of 36 feet, whichever is less. Within the suburban corridor, that's going to be limited to no more than 60% of the overall width of the structure, with a maximum width of 36 feet, whichever is less. So we're no longer regulating that length that the projection can stick out. We had it maximized at 15 feet, but we've taken that standard out, along with the standard that in our urban, if you had a house, then the garage faces the street, that garage door basically had to be offset 5 feet from the front of the house. So those are the changes we are making to the land development code. Stand for any questions you may have.
It says except for PUDs and historic districts. Is there going to be, is that the law that still allows that in those districts?
Yes, yeah, the legislation says you can still regulate within.
And then in those areas, are we
historic
defining our old criteria still?
No, there's different criteria within the historic standards, but and yes, as far as PUDs goes, when we do a PUD, we kind of negotiate those things anyway.
So there's not going to be here's our bare minimum
right.
to build from. Okay.
Any other questions? Any questions from the audience?
Item 7, changes to Article 10, concurrency standards to provide clarification regarding the concurrency determination process and adopt review requirements for major traffic studies. Applicant, City of Lakeland.
Good morning. For the record, Chuck Barmby with the Community and Economic Development Department. The intent of this amendment package is to really formalize the traffic study procedures that we generally already have in place, either through the comprehensive plan, through our kind of our technical standards memorandum that we provide to traffic consultants at the start of the development review process, or our separate city concurrency management ordinance, which was last updated several years ago. And so what we're trying to do here is at least kind of using the land development code terminology to better define when traffic studies are required, either binding concurrency studies that are typically required at the subdivision platting or the site plan approval process, or non-binding concurrency determinations that occur generally at either land use or zoning action at the planning and zoning board level and the city commission. And so there's really, the study procedures are generally the same. It's just in terms of the binding concurrency determination, we lock down capacity on our transportation system, our water and wastewater system, and in our school capacity for certain periods of time once that binding concurrency determination is made. Now, in terms of our traffic study procedures and requirements, for our level of service standards as they are adopted in the comprehensive plan today, we base our determinations on PM peak hour traffic demand and capacity. And to do that, we utilize what is known as the roadway network database that's published by the Polk Transportation Planning Organization. It's a countywide planning group that looks at traffic and transportation issues from roadways to transit to bicycle pedestrian, but they produce a database that looks at the carrying capacity of each roadway segment on what we call the arterial or collector network. So if it's a county road, if it's a major municipal road, or if it's a state road, it is tracked within this roadway network database. And so we use that as a basis for determining whether or not there's available capacity on the road system. We also, as part of the methodology process that we do today, work out today with the development community, is we look at the project impact area, how far out do we require an analysis of the road system, and industry standard is what we call 5% impact area. So if development consumes 5% or more of the peak hour directional capacity on a roadway segment, that would be part of the project impact area. We look at not only the segments within those bounds, but also intersections, signalized intersections, or any other major intersection that may become a problem based on local knowledge, engineering, planning judgment, those types of things. So the 5% significance test is key, and we wanted to get that into the code with these procedures. We also look at distribution and assignment, which is important to not only figure out exactly what direction generally are project trips coming to and from the development site, but how are they getting there? There's a transportation model that is developed and maintained by the Department of Transportation that looks at the traffic network across a larger region, including not only Polk County, but also going into Hillsborough County, over in Osceola and Orange counties. And developers for certain size projects are required to use that traffic model as a basis for determining traffic distribution and assignment. So through these amendments, we would be formalizing that process as well, and at least clarifying the tool that would be used to make those initial determinations. Of course, adjustments would be made based on local knowledge or other pending development proposals that may affect how traffic comes in and out of a development site. In addition to what's listed in the amendment package, we wanted to clarify that there are certain tools that are used both nationally and at the state level that really set a standard groundwork for how these studies are conducted and the basis of items like trip generation. We use the Institute of Transportation Engineers Trip Generation Manual as the basis of looking at PM peak hour trip generation, daily trip generation, or if it's a special project, looking at certain periods to determine if there are or will not be a major issue. You may have a residential development that has a greater demand during the morning peak, the AM peak, and so we would look at how ITE would look at trip generation and calculate that as the basis of determining impacts and going through a specific traffic study process. Midday, we've also in the past have evaluated stadiums that had their own different characteristics, and so we try to use as much of what is accepted nationally or at statewide level as possible, again to provide some certainty to the public and to the developer and to ourselves that the studies are being conducted in a standardized and acceptable fashion. We look at the highway capacity manual procedures. We look at the state's manual of uniform traffic studies also again as basis for conducting these studies, and we wanted to make sure that was clear in the procedures that we're outlining today. Data collection is also very important, that when we conduct a methodology meeting with a consultant, we want to ensure that traffic counts are collected at a time that is acceptable and generally representative of the traffic that is on the network today. So we don't, we don't allow traffic counts to be collected on the weeks of holidays. If somebody wanted to go out and conduct a traffic study, unless it was something related, a major retail development that had a large holiday shopping demand, we would not allow traffic data to be collected between the week of, Christmas and New Year's, for example, or anything around Thanksgiving. And we generally try to stay away from 3-day weekends and other times that affect travel so that they're not standard. When traffic studies come in, particularly for mixed-use developments, we want to ensure that the cumulative impacts of that development are analyzed. We don't want somebody to come in, and we've had a couple of recent cases like this where somebody has come in and has proposed a component of a development as part of a larger master plan and wanted to kind of look at a particular development phase by itself and not look at the full or greater impacts. And so we wanted to clarify and ensure that cumulative analyses are required. If you're coming in with a medical office and retail and a housing component, we want to look at everything in its entirety because, one, we need to figure out conditions for development approval looking out through project build-out. But we also want to recognize that there could be some interaction within the discrete development phases or uses within a project that could lower trip generation. So we need to look at these comprehensively, and getting a cumulative analysis is the best way to do that. We're also now, and this is for about 10 years now, we have been what is determined to be a transportation concurrency exception area. So the state really doesn't dictate for us how we should go about making concurrency determinations from a transportation standpoint. So that gives us a lot of flexibility to look at other transportation modes, whether it's transit, bicycle, or pedestrian, to make sure that we have a real balanced approach of mitigating project traffic. And so typically what we will do is, in working out a methodology with a developer, is if we're aware of a specific pedestrian demand, or if we're aware that the project site is on a transit route, we want to make sure that that is accounted for in some form or fashion consistent with what we call our TCEEA designation by the state, but also our own multimodal level of service standards that the City Commission has adopted as part of the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan that was just updated, approved by the City Commission and is waiting to become effective, also now includes what we call a Vision Zero goal. So we make a clear statement that no traffic fatality or serious injury is acceptable within the city of Lakeland, and we may require other elements to be evaluated as part of traffic studies to make sure that we're meeting our Vision Zero goal. One of the kind of the typical project types that we've seen lately are convenience stores. And convenience stores generate a significant amount of pedestrian traffic. And so we want to make sure that on-site circulation and how a development site relates to the surrounding road system provides as much safe ingress and egress for pedestrians and bicyclists as possible. So that is something that we would look at in conjunction with our Vision Zero goal. Ultimately, we are not going to supersede any permitting requirements by the Florida Department of Transportation or Polk County for their facilities. And so there could be separate requirements for turn lanes, signalization, other things that are developed as part of their own separate driveway permitting processes. And so we want to make sure that that was clear. But ultimately, the traffic studies that are approved must be conducted according to an approved methodology. That's the way it is today, and we want to formalize it through this process because the methodology really is ultimately the key document that governs how the actual traffic study is conducted for an individual development site. So if the methodology is not good on the front end, then the traffic study has flaws going, all the way through the final result. Based on some review by our counterparts at the county and also some additional review by our traffic operations division, there are two changes that are proposed to the language that was included in your packet, and those are shown on your screen here. And essentially, the language in red, it just states that, as appropriate, the methodology shall address the required methods for considering multimodal, pedestrian, bicycle, and transit, interaction with adjacent land uses and transportation infrastructure. So that is just kind of consolidating or a more concise statement to what I just said in my presentation and to what was in the previous draft of the traffic study language. The county also asked that we clarify that the study shall be based on the most recent published roadway network database, so that we don't have somebody that comes in using a study or a roadway network database that's 4 or 5 years old and expecting to move that forward in traffic studies today or in the future. So we wanted to put that clarification in there as well. And so with that, I'll be happy to stand for any questions that the committee or the board has.
I don't have a question, I just have a statement as to how appreciative we are, Chuck, that you explain these things so well. and we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate the board's support.
Any other comments, questions? The audience? Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Now, that concludes the public meeting. We're now into our general meeting session. Does anyone have any corrections or changes to the minutes from the July meeting? We have a motion to approve the minutes.
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Yeah. That's item 9 now.
Item 9, request for a change in land use on approximately 8.23 acres from convenience center to conservation. A change in land use on approximately 6.29 acres from residential low to convenience center. And a change in zoning on approximately 6.29 acres from limited development to pedestrian commercial districts on property located north of the Polk Parkway, east of Airport Road, and south of Steeplechase Drive, 3002 Airport Road. Owner Palm Airport Road LLC, applicant Hetty Harmon, Civil Serve Design Group, Inc. Note, applicant has requested a 1-month continuance to revise the application to address the concerns of Steeplechase residents.
Good morning. Again, Matthew Lyons, Community Economic Development. As indicated on the agenda, the applicant is requesting a 1-month continuance. This is in response to the testimony you heard at the public hearing last month. They're going to be revising the application as a PUD to provide the opportunity to more condition the actual approval there. Primarily, we're looking at the buffering along the west side of Steeplechase there. As you heard last month, we had a number of residents who had concerns about the type of buffer, the size, height, other materials used there. So they will be coming back next month as a PUD. We will renotice as a new hearing and send out letters again to the residents, so they will have the opportunity to come out and testify again should they choose to do so. So we are requesting a 1-month continuance for that.
Thank you.
Just need a motion.
Item 10,
We need a motion for,
I'm sorry.
I think, to continue.
Would you?
I move that we approve the applicant's request for a delay for 1 month.
And I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I must recuse myself from that vote.
Thank you.
Item 10, major modification of PUD zoning for Parkway Preserve, a previously approved 300-unit, multifamily residential development to allow driveway access on Airport Road on property located south of Carillon Boulevard and west of Airport Road, 3301 Airport Road. Owner LMC Lakeland Development, Inc., applicant Timothy Campbell.
Good morning. For the record, I'm Philip Scarce with Community and Economic Development. This is a carryover from our public hearing we had last month. Again, the applicant is requesting modifications to the language within the PUD referring to access and access improvements. Just to refresh you on the location, this is the Polk Parkway, this is Airport Road, this is Carillon Boulevard. The site is right here, just south of Carillon Boulevard. Showing you the PUD location. This was the plan that was adopted by the City Commission earlier this year. The plan included an emergency access on Airport Road, as well as improvements to Carillon Boulevard, which included an eastbound right turn lane going south, and then a westbound left turn lane into the project site. As we discussed last month, the applicant is proposing two access alternatives based on what they can get approved by the Florida Department of Transportation on Airport Road at this location here. So they're proposing two access options. We'll call those options A and B, but in the packet there'll be different attachment labels, but for this purpose there'll be A and D and A and B. And one change as well is that we'll go back to the site plan. You can see the site layout has changed as well. It's more compact. Parking is more externally located. You have a centrally located community area here with amenities, a little roundabout entrance feature. So we see that as a big improvement to the overall site plan. But this first option A would allow access, limited access on Airport Road, but it would also provide those improvements that were adopted within the original plan unit development, which includes that right turn lane on Carillon Boulevard going south on Airport Road, as well as that additional left turn lane into the project site. Option B, it's the same site plan as far as the building orientations and things like that, but it would exclude those improvements on Carillon Boulevard, specifically that left turn lane, and that is the right turn lanes with more of a I shouldn't say full access, but more of a functional access on Airport Road. And then what the theory is that the trips would be split between those two entrances. As you heard from the public hearing previously last year or the year before, the residents did have a big concern about the traffic backups at the gate, Carillon Boulevard going into the site. And we have analyzed that, and Chuck Barnby and the applicant's transportation engineer will go over those findings with you. But I just do want to mention that we did have the public hearing last month, but emails have been pouring in from the residents at Carillon. We've received 75 emails so far, and I just wanted to assure that the residents that are watching out there that yes, we've got your emails and we've been reading them. I've been reading them, and there were some of them had little mixed messages. So I just wanted to define or just kind of break down the types of emails we're receiving. And I break down, like I mentioned, we've got a total of 75 emails. Kind of break those into three categories. The first category wants the developer to still make those improvements to Carillon Boulevard because there's still concerns about access there. The second was they just don't want access on Carillon Boulevard at all. The third is they just don't want anything. So, but out of those 75 emails, 54 emails were from applicants from residents that want to see MACON make those improvements to Carillon Boulevard if this development goes through. So that's the majority of them, those 54. 19 emails we got were no access onto Carillon Boulevard. They want to see the applicant work something out with FDOT and just have the only access point on Airport Road, and that was 19. And again, there were just only 2 emails just that were just against development, period. So I wanted to break that down to show you that when you send an email to staff, we do log them in and we do read them, and we wanted to make sure that you are aware of that, that the emails we received, we're just not just shoving them off and putting them in a corner. We log them in and we number them and we do read them. So with that being said, looking at the conditions that are being proposed, it would change number 9 within the PUD. A and B here, and an eastbound right turn lane on Carillon Boulevard at State Road 572 Airport Boulevard intersection with the westbound left turn lane on Carillon Boulevard at the site entrance, or B, a fully functional right-in, right-out driveway access on Airport Road with southbound right turn lane as required by FDOT in the event the Carillon Lakes Property Owners Association will not allow the construction of the turn lane improvements on Carillon Boulevard at the site entrance and Airport Road. It is expected that the existing northbound left turn lane on State Road 572 Airport Road must be extended by at least 130 feet to accommodate the estimated project traffic. I'll just go back to show you that. That would be that left-hand turn lane there. The final design shall be consistent with those shown in Exhibit 2, but shall be approved as part of the development site plan process. And then the other change is access. Access shall be limited to one primary access to Carillon Lakes Boulevard with the addition access point on multifamily residential property located south of Carillon Boulevard from Airport Road. Access to multifamily residential parcel may be limited, sorry, I'm reading the strikeout, from Carillon Boulevard and the additional access to Airport Road subject to driveway connection permit from the Florida Department of Transportation engineer. The original developer constructed a traffic signal and acceleration, deceleration, and left storage lanes at the intersection of the project entrance. Study for this project, and the rest of the things are lined out. So those are the two access improvements. So long story short, the staff is recommending approval of these recommended changes based on the outlines of the analysis that I'll have Chuck speak here in a minute, that's outlined in your staff report. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have Chuck Barbie come up and outline the applicant's study when we looked at these changes that are being made here. So I'm going to go back to this site plan. So thank you very much.
For the record, Chuck Barbie with the Community and Economic Development Department. And going back to the City Commission public hearing back in January of this year, there was a concern raised about the ability of the developer to construct turn lanes on Carillon Boulevard without getting explicit approval from the Property Owners Association. And so the conditions as they are currently written assume that the POA would provide approval for a eastbound right turn lane to be constructed at Airport Road and the point all this out, here we go, at the Carillon Lakes Airport Road intersection, and that a westbound left turn lane would be constructed into the site off of Carillon Boulevard before the guardhouse. Because of the uncertainty on whether or not the Property Owners Association would grant the necessary approval for the turn lanes to be constructed, the applicant requested a right-in, right-out, fully operational driveway on Airport Road, as opposed to the emergency access that was discussed with the last zoning action. And so the consultant for the traffic consultant for the developer provided an analysis that looked at several different options. One option being the inclusion of a right-in, right-out driveway on Airport Road without any turn lane improvements being constructed on Carillon Boulevard, to gauge whether or not that would still continue to operate at an acceptable level of service, and basically meeting the intent of the conditions as they were previously written, and certainly our standards in the Comprehensive Plan and Land Development Code. So based on the traffic study provided by Elizabeth Rodriguez and Associates, this alternative, or what we're calling now option B, would increase during the AM peak period, would increase the eastbound delay, I'm going to point here, on Carillon Boulevard, approaching Airport Road, from 21.1 seconds to 33.2 seconds. It would also increase the queue from 127 feet to some point beyond 204 feet. So from an operational analysis standpoint, this option would, the eastbound approach would exceed the physical capacity of that intersection. However, from a level of service standpoint, which we at the city would look at for concurrency purposes, it would still fall within an acceptable level of service standard for that intersection. We also asked the consultant to take a look at the westbound left coming into the site off of Carillon Boulevard, and the additional delay for the westbound traffic coming into the guardhouse is less than 1 second, because it assumes that there's sufficient capacity for traffic to make a left-hand turn out of the through lane and not encounter opposing traffic that would cause a delay or traffic to stop in the westbound direction on Carillon Boulevard. So how was analysis conducted to come up with this conclusion? The original study for the original zoning action back in January, like I mentioned previously, assumed that the airport road connection point would only be used for emergency purposes. So all of the projects associated with 300 apartment units would come in and out of the site via Carillon Boulevard at the airport road intersection. With option B, all of the eastbound left turns heading north on Airport Road towards the Polk Parkway will continue to use that signalized intersection. The study assumed that all of the other traffic movements would be split 50% using Carillon Boulevard, 50% using the southern driveway connection. So we started to see a more of a true traffic trip distribution between the two driveways. And the reason why the study assumed that all of the northbound lefts would use Carillon Boulevard is because there's a median in the middle of Airport Road today. So traffic cannot and could not come out, make a left-hand turn to head north towards the Polk Parkway. We believe that methodology and that assumed reassignment of project traffic was reasonable, because it to me was very conservative. Depending on the amount of delay at the signalized intersection, to me it's reasonable to expect that all of the project traffic trying to head south on Airport Road would just use the right-in, right-out access point instead of going 50-50 between Carillon Lakes and the right-in, right-out driveway. So based on a solid analysis, based on solid assumptions, the option B that we're talking about with the Airport Road right-in, right-out driveway and without turn lane improvements on Carillon Boulevard, it doesn't perform as well as what is currently approved in the PUD zoning ordinance, but it does operate at an acceptable level of service, and it does operate without creating unnecessary congestion on Carillon Boulevard. So kind of as the conditions are written, we wanted to give the developer two options to work from, one without an Airport Road driveway, one with an Airport Road driveway. And we believe that provides the flexibility for the developer and also gives the Property Owners Association some certainty in terms of how access would be granted to the site if turn lanes are not allowed on Carillon Boulevard. I believe the traffic consultant for the developer is also here in case you have specific questions regarding the study itself, but we'll stand for any questions that you have at this point.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't DOT decline the request to have this as an emergency exit before? And if so, have they had some kind of a change of heart that now they've decided that this is going to be acceptable?
We have had subsequent conversations with the Department of Transportation, and this was actually conversations that we were having leading up to the City Commission hearing in January. DOT, subject to a formal permit request and an analysis that meets their requirements, is willing to entertain and support a right-in, right-out driveway connection on Airport Road if it's pulled as far south as possible towards the southern property line and is a joint access with the property to the south. So DOT is amenable to a connection to Airport Road. It only falls a little short of its regular spacing standards as it is, but with the cross connectivity that would be provided to the south, they are much more amenable to having that connection today. So we've had, I think, at least 2 conversations with the DOT permitting staff, and that work is underway to provide data to them to support a driveway connection. And I see Mr. Tim Campbell would like to enter some remarks as well.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, board members. For purposes of your record, my name is Tim Campbell, the law firm of Clark Campbell, Lancaster, and Munson, 500 South Florida Avenue here in Lakeland. I represent the developer, MatCon, with respect to this request, and here with me today are Beck Daniel with MatCon, Mr. Jack Weiser, Libby Rodriguez is our traffic engineer that Chuck mentioned, Stuart Rogers, our project engineer, just in case there are any questions that we need to address. And I'm going to ultimately make a request as it relates to the proposed language that is in the staff report, but I want to give you a little history so you understand why we're here and why we're making that request. You heard Chuck tell you we were approved by the City Commission in January for the 300 unit multifamily development called Parkway Preserve. You heard, and it's correct, that there were objections as it related to this developer's construction of improvements on Carillon Boulevard. And kind of the behind the scenes, and it was discussed at the City Commission meeting, there's an easement. We have an access right onto that boulevard, yet it's an easement that doesn't allow the construction of improvements. So if the association wouldn't agree to expand that easement, we would have no ability to construct those improvements. We began discussions with the association within 30 days after that January hearing, and here we are in August. We do not have a resolution of that, but I will tell you that we have had better meetings and we have ongoing discussions, and we're hopeful that we can get that addressed. But 7 months later, we finally decided, okay, we need to move forward with this optional access, which allocates the trips between the 2 access points. And to your question, ironically enough, DOT said absolutely not until about a week before our City Commission meeting, in which they said, well, and probably with Mr. Barnaby's help in the City of Lakeland, of how this all made sense for the Airport Road corridor, that if it were a shared access, that maybe they would allow that access. And since that time, MatCon has had their traffic engineers prepare some analysis, talk to DOT, so they have given us the kind of the thumbs up that they would consider approval subject to plans that meet their criteria, including what your staff has added, the extension of the northbound Airport Road turn lane into Carillon Boulevard. So those discussions have gone better. They have agreed that they would allow that, and that's MatCon has proceeded in that manner. So despite ongoing efforts, we've had an inability to resolve that issue, and we can't be held hostage to not be able to have access. And the split between Airport and Carillon splits the trips up, so neither one of those are overburdened. So we do need the option. You heard about the analysis and the increase timing on the eastbound exit. I would have you keep in mind that we think that's because there's already an issue there. And we heard from testimony from the residents, they already have an issue with that. Our improvement would help that. The delay is the difference from not having it at all. We think it's already necessary and would already improve access and the egress from Carillon Lakes for the residents who are there. And so we remain hopeful that we can get that worked out and we would proceed in that manner. But 7 months later, MatCon has to make some decisions. It has lenders and other parties, and it needs to move forward. So we were pleased with the breakdown of the comments, the 2 that, no development. I'm glad there were only 2. No access. We have access rights, so that can't change. And we are in conversations with a group, a representative group from the association to try to resolve that. I do want to tell you, so here's an example of the language, of why we're going to request a change in the language. When the City Commission adopted the PUD, They didn't consult with us, but they put in language that there was a building, you may recall. Let's see if I can do this right. That building, in the original plan, the association and the residents had a concern with its proximity to the Carillon Boulevard. And so we agreed at the hearing to say, hey, if the association prefers, we would flip the building and the parking, because this was a landscape buffer. We'll flip that, moving the building farther away from the boulevard, making it, as far as sight line, it would make it better for the association. So the condition said it's up to the association to pick. 7 months later, while we submitted a request in writing for that decision, we still don't have one. And while we've had discussions about it, we still haven't had one. And so that's why we can't have absolute language, because if they decline or fail or refuse to respond, we still need to be able to move forward. But I do want to tell you that MatCon has been listening and working, and so this site plan that Chuck talked about kind of reorganized the whole front of the development to move this building even farther away than it was in that either of those plans, and to move kind of the clubhouse area away. It kind of created this courtyard. And so it's a lot smoother. And we provided this to the association and talked to them about it. And I think it was better received. But it was done for that reason in response to our meetings with the association and a sensitivity to what their concerns were just from a site plan perspective. So we've already done that and committed to it, even though they didn't elect. So we are certainly trying to do our part to be good neighbors. So finally, with respect to the language, because of the background I've given you, I want to explain real quickly. Okay, we're going to do the bottom one first because it's the easiest. All of those changes are simply because prior to this change, we are not allowed to have an access to Airport Road. The PUD says for all of Carillon Lakes, you can only access Airport Road at the Carillon Boulevard intersection. So technically, we're not allowed to have that Airport Road access. So there is a lot of strike through and underline, but that's what that's about. That allows us to have that access for the multifamily residential Parkway Preserve site. So that's all that changes. On the top one, it provides the OR that gives us the right to do the Airport Road access and not have to do those improve the turn lane improvements to Carillon Boulevard. Our request is that where it says that that we can only do option B in the event that Carillon Lakes Property Owners Association will not allow. Well, we don't want that to become the same thing as the city commission condition that we still don't have a response to. So what we would request is that a sentence be added, and I spoke to Chuck about this just to make sure. It would say the association must grant approval for access and other improvements to Carillon Boulevard and an easement amendment allowing such improvements in a form acceptable to the multifamily residential developer on or before September 17, 2021. That's another month. We've been in discussions, and in case someone gets up, we owe them the latest response. And I'm sure as you see all these cases come, sadly enough, I've been busy, so it's my turn to be a little slow to get back to them. So I will take that. But that gives us a month, and importantly, it happens before the final city commission meeting. We really want to get this resolved. We want to work with the association. I think we've shown that by changing our site plan, we're the ones who initiated the discussion. We really are working hard with them. And I said, it didn't go, we weren't really making a lot of progress for a while, but we've had better meetings and we've had better discussions. So we're hopeful that we can get that resolved. But either way, this developer needs to have the ability to move forward to develop Parkway Preserve, especially given there's been transportation analysis that the split of traffic between Airport Road and Carillon Boulevard without the turn lanes still is sufficient. It's fine. There's almost no delay on the inbound, and there would be a little more delay on the outbound. But keep in mind, as it relates to our trips, and you heard Chuck said, probably almost all of our southbound trips that come from Parkway Preserve would choose our Airport Road exit. That would be easier just to go out, take a right, and go south. Now, northbound, they're going to come out to Carillon Boulevard because they want access to the traffic signal. So we appreciate your consideration. I stand available for any questions you have. Our team is here should you have any technical questions, and we'd like the opportunity to further comment if you have any public testimony regarding our request.
Any questions, Mr. Campbell?
I've got one question. On option A, with the improvements along Carillon, just thinking of timing and how that coordination works with DOT, you'd still pursue that additional access point on Airport Road?
Keep in mind, from day one, our proposal was at the very least to ask for an emergency access onto Airport Road. So we are, in all our site plans, we have an access there. It just wasn't going to be a fully functional access. I can't commit to what, if DOT comes along and says you have to do the 130-foot extension of this turn lane, you have to do 8 billion other things, and we're able to work it out with the association that Carillon Boulevard improvements are acceptable, we kind of do that together and get it done. It could be that we stay at the Carillon Boulevard primary access with just an emergency access on Airport. And if we can't work that out, we would do our airport access and have whatever access we have on Carillon. And then it could happen that we do both. It depends on how those negotiations with DOT go. As long as we're able to work it out with the association, you could see both. But we're not at that point where we can commit that it would be both, but that's kind of where we're at.
And then for just trying to think it through a little bit, for the emergency access, has that emergency access discussion been had with DOT of how that would work? Just simply having that access point there, would they require a driveway permit and evaluation of how that would operate?
They have standards in a process for an emergency access. I've dealt with one on South Florida Avenue, it's very similar, multifamily, residential, emergency access only. But quite frankly, once we've gotten to the point where they're willing to talk about a fully functional access, that's been the focus of our discussions with them.
I have a question. The 10-second delay that was mentioned, does that pertain to option A or B? Or both?
That pertained to if we did option B and did not do A.
I see. So, but it's only 10 seconds,
Correct.
according to the traffic study.
Correct.
12 seconds.
Approximately 10, 12.
Thank you. That's it.
Thank you.
So in terms of Mr. Campbell's comments, I think that the big issue that at least I completely understand is the need for some time certainty in terms of when a decision would be made by the Property Owners Association. I think some 30-day timeline is reasonable. I guess my only question, this is for Mr. Simpson, would we be able to have something that would be effective ahead of the City Commission adoption of this language, or does that date need to be some point beyond the City Commission hearing? That would be the only thing that I would see as an issue outside of the whole concept of providing a time certain.
And thank you to Chuck, that's a good point. So just for everyone's education, so we will have the response, especially now that I had to get up here and say that it was my fault that we haven't gotten back today. There has been an easement document out there for months. And so it's not like we have to start that from scratch. We have to kind of finish as to an overall agreement. The easement wouldn't be in place. So I suspect that if it goes well and we can come to an agreement, the easement's just a part of it. And it's a very simple amendment that says we can do turn lane and landscape, because part of the discussions is that we would add landscaping to the Boulevard parcel. We could do construct turn lanes that are consistent with what's been approved in this PUD and landscaping in that boulevard, subject to the city's approval as far as the improvements. And so that's kind of in place. And we haven't gotten to where we've kind of finalized the negotiations and everybody approved it. But I think we could, within 30 days, if we can reach an agreement, the easement should fall right into place. And we would be able to have that. And it would have to be, we could, I guess, well, they're going to amend it. We could sign it, but it'd be subject to closing and those kind of things. But we could be ready within 30 days as long as we can reach an agreement and finalize that.
So I would add that adds a complication because of the fact that this goes on to City Commission, and the City Commission second reading would be September 20th, which will occur after the date that you were recommending that this easement amendment be executed. So if it does get executed, there's no need for this language at that point.
Right, but there's no harm in the language. There would be, if we have it resolved, we've reached an agreement with the association, we have a signed easement, there's no harm that that language is in there when the City Commission approves it. If we haven't done that and they haven't responded or we can't come to an agreement, then when they approve the ordinance with that language, we'll be able to move forward with either option because we have been trying and will have continued to try up through the City Commission approval date.
And the way the language is proposed, and I just received it in an email a short while ago, it says that the association must grant approval for access and other improvements. That's not a condition that the City of Lakeland can enforce. We cannot force the Property Owners Association to enter into that easement amendment. So I think that we could state something to the effect of, in the event that the association does not grant the amendment, then what would follow after that? But we can't say that they must grant approval. We have no control over that.
And the intent is exactly as Teresa has described. It's obviously the city's not going to tell the association what to do, nor are we. But for the condition as written to say that we can only use Exhibit B if they grant it, we want that to be include the modification to the easement and that there be a date certain, so we have some certainty that we can move forward, hopefully with an agreement in hand, and if not, still we have some certainty that we can move forward. So we don't have a problem. I wanted to share with the City Attorney's Office what we were thinking of specifically, and we don't have an objection to it being tweaked as Teresa's just described.
Any other questions?
Just one last question on the traffic report. Just based on this commentary, with option A, was that traffic analysis done as the access point on Airport Road as a emergency access only?
The option A that was approved by the City Commission assumed no fully functional driveway on Airport Road. So everything came in and out of the site at Carillon.
Cool.
Anyone else? Chuck, do you have anything?
I guess just to comment, I mean, it seems to me that what they're asking for is just some time certainty for this language about whether or not the association is going to approve with that, and I think we could certainly work something like that in if that's the direction of the board to recommend as part of the recommendation. I think is the language that's in front of us right now. I mean, we could, just add to that basically to put some kind of deadline as to when they do or don't approve of the construction onto Carillon Boulevard. But it would just be the direction of the board if the board thinks that that's appropriate or not.
I would like to move that the applicant work with the city staff so they can put in proper verbiage to allow that timeline to happen. Does that cover it?
Sure, and I mean, I don't know if you, are you moving approval based on staff recommendation with an additional amendment to that effect? Is that?
I believe so, yes. Is
Everybody
that clear?
understand?
I mean, I'm not good at this.
So just to restate, the motion would be then to approve per staff recommendation with added language to include some kind of deadline for the association to approve or disapprove the construction.
Is that up to us to put in that date, or is that something that we
Well, do you have
negotiate with the Property Owners Association?
do you have a deadline in mind for that?
Can I ask a question? Everything needs to be completed, if I understood correctly, by when in September for the last city commission meeting before I assume they have no more meetings until after the elections. Is that correct? Or when is, somebody had mentioned sometime in September was the last meeting.
Right, September 20th is the second meeting in September for the city commission.
So, what would you consider a reasonable date, the 15th of September? Does that give enough time to everybody?
I think that's what they were requesting 30 days. I think Chuck said 30 days was reasonable, so that's what's been recommended so far is 30 days. Unfortunately, we don't have anybody from the association to respond as to whether or not that's reasonable.
And what is the option for the developer if the homeowners association just does not make any recommendation or any approval?
I think what we would assume that it's not approved, that they're not approving improvements on Carillon Boulevard. If they take no action, then the city would Mr. Campbell can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that we would, after that time frame, we would assume that that's no longer an option and they would proceed with their other options and move forward.
It's actually the opposite. That B, which is the real option. A is already there. B is the new option, that if they fail to enter into an agreement or to respond by that date, then we can go ahead with B without it being subject to their approval, which is what it says now. It says we can do B in the event, only in the event they will not allow it. But if they haven't responded at all, we just want it to be, if they have not responded, maybe this was what you said, if they've not responded or we can't enter into it by that date, it will be deemed that they will not allow it. We don't want to be in the position that technically we allow it, 19,000 things that follow that, then is it an allowance or not? And we kind of got into that with the building. Hey, if they're not responding, can we move forward? No, because the condition says, it's based on their response. So I think our proposal, and I agree, the language that's in there can be tweaked to accomplish the same thing other than the separate sentence that I read, just to say they have to respond and we have to have done these things within that 30-day period. And if not, we can continue with option B notwithstanding, because we need that ability some 7 months later for some finality.
So, you would prefer, the option you would prefer this time is B, is that right? A or B? B.
It's hard to answer because if we can enter to an agreement with them and it works, there are a lot of things about the Carillon, a lot of things about A that work very well. And we don't know everything about B yet to know what it would cost. I answered your question by saying potentially we do both regardless, but we need the association approval for B, for A to work. That's why we can't be bound to A only, because if they just refuse or they're unreasonable, not that they are, but if they were, or they just refuse to respond, then we're basically held hostage or hamstrung and we can't do anything. We can't be in that position. We've been in that position for too long. So we want to continue the discussions. We've done them in good faith. We will continue to do so, but we need a date upon which, if this can't be worked out, or if they don't respond, or if they refuse to allow us to construct those improvements that are required for A, that we can do B, that we get to elect to do B.
So maybe if I could propose something here that would give everyone some level of comfort. So if 9B read, a fully functional right-in, right-out driveway access on Airport Road with southbound right turn lane as required by FDOT in the event that the Carillon Lakes Property Owners Association has not responded by September 17th, 2021.
I would suggest that it say that in the event that the association has not approved the construction of the turn lane improvements on Carillon Boulevard at the site entrance and Airport Road by, and then put the date certain.
Jared, would you consider, I agree with the language you just said. Keep in mind, they can approve it and not give us an easement, and we're in no better position. So approve it and provide the necessary amendment to the easement to allow us to construct those improvements. We have to have both, or they can say we approve it and we still can't do anything.
Yeah, I mean, that's just, and for the board, I mean, I don't know how much of this has been clear or not, but there's been a dispute over the easement that the developer has on Carillon Boulevard and what that easement allows them to do. And so that's kind of what.
So essentially what we're being asked to do is put the deadline on for them to essentially compel the HOA to reach a decision.
Well, I don't think we're compelling them to reach a decision. What we are doing is we are allowing the developer another development option to go forward in the event that the association doesn't take any action, or they disapprove it, or they approve it with conditions that aren't contemplated in the plan that's been presented to the board. So the association can still do whatever it wants, but what's proposed is that if they, if the association doesn't allow them to put the turn lane in on Carillon Boulevard as the site plan contemplates, then they can use this access on Airport Road as another option, and they can go ahead and move forward with their development. Is that all clear? Or?
So if the HOA does approve something, you're not going to do the right in, right out on Airport Road?
I think if the HOA, that's a question for them, obviously, but
I thought from the last time we went around this that it was great the Department of Transportation was finally going to allow this right in, right out with the decel lane and all of that. And now, if I'm hearing correctly, that's not the case.
May I?
Yes.
That's a good question. And to your point again, and Matt Kahn asked me the same question. This says we have to do A or B as a condition. It does not preclude A and B. We can't be required to do A and B for the same reasons we're here now, but we can do A and B. And we've spent a lot of time and money working on B, so we can ultimately do both. If we work out something with the association, and if ultimately the airport road improvements and DOT's requirements are reasonable, there's a possibility that we do both. But and keep in mind, option B, it's not just giving us another option. It's an option based upon transportation analysis that it still works well. That's been reviewed and approved by your staff. But it gives us some finality finally that we need to be able to work through this and either get the Carillon Boulevard access approved in a manner that works where we can construct the improvements, or allows us to do airport if that's never going to happen.
At this point, they've given no indication to you, I take it. Yeah, I was under the assumption after the last meeting that B was the odds-on favorite at this point because it reduced traffic on Carillon. Is that correct?
Correct.
But they've given no indication to you as to their feelings about that.
No, well, B works. We always have, our easement does work on Carillon Boulevard. We have ingress and egress access.
Right.
We don't have the right to construct anything. So if you also, remember right now, we're not allowed to do airport. If we're also get approval and do the airport and we do split those trips, we'll still have Carillon Boulevard access. We just won't be allowed to do those improvements. And if you think about it, I think Philip Scarce read the numbers, and that should give us all a little comfort. And I will tell you, it reflects the tenor of the conversations with the association representatives. We're now in a method where we're really trying to get this done. Just as a developer, it's been 7 months. They need finality. But you heard of the comments, 54 people who emailed do want those improvements. So I think we're in a good position to work that out. And if we do those, if DOT for some reason doesn't ultimately grant airport, we're fine, but we can still do it. So really, at the end of the day, I think we've shown we've been working towards and listening to and been sensitive to the neighbors in Carillon Lakes. We are still trying to work through that. We just have to know 7 months down the road that there is some finality. So that's why we requested within 30 more days, they have to either have authorized those improvements and amended the easement to make it clear. And if not, we can do B without doing the turn lanes on Carillon Boulevard.
I've got one last question. The time frame. I get why you're requesting it, but without the time frame, the options are still there, right? A and B, y'all have the opportunity to move forward whichever direction. So, is the time frame added to this just to simply put pressure on them to move forward with something, or is there another reason? Because I'm not seeing that second reason. I don't know if that onus should be pushed back from the board.
So I understand your question. As written, we can't use B unless they have not allowed construction of the turn lane improvements. And having lived through the condition before, that without some time frame, how long do they have to decide whether or not, are we going to be another 7 months down the road, and they haven't said yes or no? That's why we're adding a time frame, and partly because we're 7 months down the road, and we started these discussions. We approached them within 30 days after the approval to start these discussions, and again, it's progressed, and they've been better discussion, and we're still planning to work with them and are hopeful that we get this done. We just need to be able to move forward with this project, even if they're not going to allow us to construct those turn lane improvements.
Now, the extension of Airport Road to the 130 foot, is that Carillon, or is that the state that determines?
So I just asked Chuck, because I wasn't sure. That 130-foot extension of the turn lane on Airport Road, northbound, DOT is going to require us to do that either way, associated with if we just had access on Carillon Boulevard, apparently that's deficient. It's one of those things where MatCon didn't cause it to be deficient, and our trips don't cause it to be deficient. It already is. But it's one of those realities developers have to deal with. So we're going to have to apparently do that 130 foot on Airport Road, no matter what of these options we do.
You need the 130 feet.
The 130 feet.
It's A or B, you need the 100. What I'm asking is, if states, if you can't do the 130 feet, if the state blocks you from going to the 130 foot mark, then you're stuck with option A, is that correct?
No, the 130 foot is not talking about where our access is. It's saying that the turn lane right now, the northbound left-hand turn lane into Carillon Boulevard, is deficient and needs to be longer. It won't impact where our access is. What you heard Chuck talking about is when you look at our site plan, that where we show it, the state and the city have been suggesting to get it farther away from the light and to better serve. They want it to serve both our property and this property to the south, to limit the number of driveway connections onto Airport Road. So what Chuck was talking about, they want us to look at moving this south. And the ordinance allows the staff to modify this site plan to address this kind of issue. And we're looking at it now. It's why our engineers here and traffic engineers, they're looking at how we do this a little different to accommodate that. But what we're talking about is this turn lane. Remember, we're never going to have a left out here. So we're not conflicting with whatever's on this side. But it's this turn lane, I can't tell where it is, but wherever it is, it's going to have to be longer by 130 more feet that we're going to be responsible for. But they're all in the same deal, but they're unrelated as far as access improvements.
So they're wanting you to move that right in, right out driveway a bit further south?
They do.
Okay.
For two reasons. One, to probably better serve both our property and the property to the south. And secondly, they have distance requirements from signals, and so that will increase the distance from the Airport Road, Carillon Boulevard intersection.
The 130 foot is actually Airport Highway. It has nothing to do with Carillon Lakes. It's
Correct.
130 foot. They're lengthening the left turn lane, the north left turn lane coming from Drainfield. That's to get into Carillon Lakes. That has nothing to do with Carillon Boulevard. It has to do with Airport Highway, correct?
Correct.
Okay, okay.
Now, if they have no response in 30 days, then you're back to square one.
No, if we don't get a response, if we don't work it out in 30 days, we have now finally the flexibility to go do Airport Road and not have to do those turn lanes, because it's an impossibility if they won't let us. So if we
in
don't,
the slide, the airport road that you have pictured, the airport road access at the bottom, is without the improvements to Carillon Boulevard. So you wouldn't be adding the extra right turn lane on Carillon Boulevard, correct?
correct.
Okay.
So yes, it's actually this option doesn't have them.
So that's A if the HOA does not respond, correct?
You're correct.
Okay.
That's A if, absolutely.
Okay.
I think it's actually
I think this is B.
It's B in the,
What is
but
shown is B.
to kind of put A and B aside, one, it puts improvements on Carillon Boulevard, and one doesn't.
I think your point was that's what Carillon Boulevard would look like. It's not option A, but that's what it would look like if we don't get the approval and we just do B.
Yes.
Carillon Boulevard would still be in that manner, and we would still have some.
Okay, so then if they don't respond in the 30 days, then you'll have the option to go back to the Department of Transportation and say, we need this right in, right out turn lane, and you're going to do that and just live with whatever Carillon Boulevard is right now as far as right turn lanes and such for people going out that way.
Correct.
Okay.
Other than that, we don't have to go back. Those discussions with DOT are ongoing.
Okay.
So the homeowners association has the option to improve Carillon Boulevard should they give you that easement adjustment, correct?
Correct, and we have been working together to get to a point where we can agree to the conditions for that to occur.
So is there a motion? Mr. Chair, we did have a motion on the floor, and I don't know
We have a public comment.
if you want to take a comment, or if you want
Well,
to.
I wanted to ask you if you would just restate this motion for us again as you suggested.
The motion was to approve per staff recommendation with an amendment to the paragraph 9B to put a time frame on approval from the association. We were talking about clarifying that a little bit further, and that's when all the other discussion began to occur. But based on all the discussion, I think we would recommend that to amend paragraph B to clarify that the approval would be an executed easement allowing the construction, and then put a date as to when that easement needs to be executed. And I think that
It should be after city commission.
maybe within 30 days, I think our recommendation would be 30 days after the approval of the PUD by the commission. That would give the association plenty of time to meet and discuss, and then have their attorney review whatever easement document is drafted, and then get that recorded, all of which can take a little bit of time. And I don't know how they're going to be notified of any of this either. So hopefully Mr. Campbell will notify them of this. Do you have anything to add to that?
Other than this, obviously we'll have a public hearing before the city commission, and so this will be presented on that September 20th date. And for the residents that have been following it, obviously they're going to continue to follow it, and they are likely watching now, so they know about the discussion. But yes, it would be, I would hope that the applicant's representative would just convey that back to the Property Owners Association, the board members.
But, okay. I'm not sure, but there is someone who wants to speak, so do we just kind of not move anything or
Well,
change the
I
motion?
think you've already
or
made the
rescind motion?
motion if you want to accept what I'm recommending as an amendment to it, and then we can get a second on that, and then we can take the public comment. Or if you want to rescind the motion, and then we can open up comment, and then we can make new motions.
Yeah, we normally don't have public comment in this section of the meeting. Is it, this, we'll go ahead and have it?
We did have public comment at the last meeting on this item.
Yeah.
There will be time for additional public comment in front of the commission, but it's always the discretion of the board to entertain public comment. And if somebody, you know, if the gentleman came down here to comment, I would recommend the board hear from him.
Yeah, I would like to hear it.
Okay, yes,
We have to do the motion first?
I think it might be easier for you to just rescind the motion if you're okay with that, and then we can entertain new motions after the comments.
I will rescind my motion.
Okay. Yes, sir, if you want to comment, it's a 3-minute time limit.
Good morning, and thank you very much for going out of your way to allow a little testimony here. My name is Dennis Nitschke. I am a resident of Carillon Lakes, 3947 Whistlewood Circle. Two things I wanted to, several things. One is I want to thank Mr. Campbell for the words of saying he's committed to moving forward together on this, because this has been, from what I understand, has been our goal as well. I have to make it clear, I'm not a POA board member. I'm speaking as a resident right now, please let me do that. The thing that jumps out at me with this new language that I learned today was that we all have the same starting point several months ago. We're at the same point today, but MadCon and Carillon Lakes has different endpoints. For MadCon, the key is to finish construction and get the property open. I think you've seen with Carillon Lakes a greater openness to the apartments and to the access issues. We have moved, as has MadCon, on these issues, but our end date is forever. MadCon wants to get this done today if they could. The question is, we have other concerns that may or may not be addressed with MadCon if all of their needs are addressed. We have major concerns over safety and security of whatever happens. If there is no improvement to Carillon Boulevard, and any major traffic increase raises safety and security issues for us. The question, I guess, someone brought up was, what if the association gives an answer with conditions relating to safety and security? If we're not allowed to give an answer with conditions, MadCon is basically done. They've arrived at their end date. We have to live with those safety and security issues forever, because you would be mandating the easement be modified to address that and signed. That means there's no room for conditions. So that's the only concern that I wanted to raise. Again, we want a positive resolution. The word good neighbors has come up often. We've used it and they have. That's our end goal, but we also want safety and security issues addressed as well. Thank you very much for letting me present.
Any questions, gentlemen? Thank you, sir.
Just one quick response. Keep in mind, safety and security were part of the overall PUD consideration and were addressed. And I'm not, I'm not saying that that's not their concern, and we've discussed that as part of it. But this is an access issue. And if we don't have traffic on Carillon Boulevard, it would be even less trips. But we're sensitive to that. We've been in good discussions. We are going to continue to do that. But we, I don't think you can say we have to do additional security and safety things from a City of Lakeland PUD perspective, because that's all already been decided. But we are discussing those things. That's part of what they want to discuss, and we have been, and we're working on that. So we appreciate the residents' comments, and we'll continue to remain committed to work forward with them.
Any questions, Mr. Campbell? Would you like to restate your motion at this time?
No, because I can't remember. I'll probably mess it up.
Time for some coffee.
So just a question, the decision we have before us today will go back to the commission September 20th, is that right? Probably be ideal whatever we have a motion of doesn't commit somebody to have a decision before that meeting. Does that make sense?
Would us going with staff recommendation cover that? Because
if they could put the staff recommendation back up, we can see it. And then we can just see.
for staff recommendation.
Okay, so this is the staff recommendation, and just to kind of step back a little bit and remind the board what we're here for. They already have a PUD that's approved. The existing PUD allows for an emergency-only access onto Airport Road, and then access through Carillon Boulevard that would require improvements to be made. They've been unable to negotiate those improvements with the association, and so now we're back and to explore the options. And so this is what's presented here is the staff recommendation, and the issue that they've taken issue with some of the specific language here because it says in the event that the association will not allow the construction. So it only allows them to do the fully functional driveway to airport in the event that the association does not allow the construction. So that they're asking for a little bit more precision in that as to what exactly that means. The gentleman that spoke is saying that from what I'm hearing is that they don't want this board or the city to tilt the scale in that negotiation over the easement. So I don't think the board is going to tell the association that they can or can't negotiate additional conditions or different conditions. That's a separate thing apart from what the board's looking at, that easement.
I would assume that the POA, no matter what options chosen, the overriding concern about safety would be something that the POA could inject as a deal maker or a deal breaker, no matter which way they went as far as the options that are presented.
Right, because they may agree to allow the construction of the turn lanes as long as certain other things are done as well. Those are the kinds of conditions that they're talking about, but that's through their easement negotiation. It's not necessarily dealing with this. So, but what they are requesting is at least the applicant is that there be some certainty to can they move forward and go ahead and have this full right in, right out driveway in the event that those negotiations come to an impasse or they're unsuccessful.
Oh, I see. So that has nothing to do with the time frame or anything like that?
Well, the time frame would give them the certainty. So that the staff recommendation right now does not have a time frame in it. And so that if you were to move to approve her staff recommendation, it would be the language that's in front of you. If you wanted to put a time frame on it, we did talk about adding at the end of the first sentence there, maybe putting a date certain on that, and then also changing the term not allow the construction to something like an executed easement. So just something along the lines of, in the event the Carillon Lakes Properties Association does not execute an easement allowing the construction of the turn lane improvements by the date certain. That would be a recommended amendment to the staff recommendation.
Correct me if I'm wrong. So the entrance and exit coming onto Airport Highway, Carillon Lakes has no say on that at all. They can do that as long as DOT says they can, correct?
The reason that Carillon Lakes the association, the reason that they have some ability to kind of control what's happening here is because there's an easement for Carillon Boulevard, which is a private road, that this property, the developer here, they have that easement that says that they can access their property through Carillon Boulevard. What it doesn't say is that they can go in and build turn lanes on Carillon Boulevard and change Carillon Boulevard.
But the right lane onto Airport Highway, the part that DOT thumbs
Right.
down the last time, that really has nothing to do with Carillon Lakes.
Right.
They can do that tomorrow if DOT says that's what they can do.
Correct.
Okay, so what we're talking about here is the airport, the Carillon Lakes Boulevard,
Right.
which is all dependent upon the HOA anyway. They can do the part that goes on to Airport Road.
Well, that's
They
what
choose to.
not under the existing PUD. So that's
Correct.
why
Yes,
why
so
we're here.
that's really what we're saying. Are we going to allow, because that was not in the original POD or PUD, we're going to allow this entrance and exit on Airport Road, and they can negotiate with Carillon Lakes all they want up and down the boulevard. But they're asking just for this here today. Is that correct? I mean,
Right.
that's really the only thing that's different.
They're asking for that to be an option, that they could have that fully functional right in, right out,
Right.
in the event that it doesn't get approved by the association.
And I mean, to be honest with you, it's not the association's property, the part that comes out onto Airport Road.
Oh, right. Yeah, the association doesn't have any ability to
No,
prevent
so
that.
all they're asking, in the initial PUD, DOT had said they could not utilize, they were not going to allow them to do that. Now it appears that DOT apparently they're going to be changing their mind, or they're hopeful. So if that's the case, they can go ahead and do that. And if Carillon Lakes HOA wants to drag their feet on the other part of it, that's up to the HOA. It's not up to us at all. All they're asking now is that they change the Airport Road entrance and exit. I mean, isn't that the only thing that's different, really?
I think what the developer is trying to do is get the HOA involved so they are good neighbors, but they would like a time frame because it's been going on for 7 months and they still haven't gotten an answer for that turn lane, which to me would alleviate. You have the turn lane, so you would have less backup traffic that needs to go into Carillon Lakes. I for whatever reason, I don't know why they're not giving them a response. But
But do we have the ability to say to the HOA, you've got to respond in a certain amount of time? I'm not sure we do.
I don't think that, I mean, we wouldn't recommend that be what the board, the action of the board. What we're recommending is essentially that if the HOA does not act, well, I shouldn't even say that we're recommending. I've said, based on the discussion and what the applicant's asking, is that if they fail to take action, then it's essentially assumed that it's going to be okay that they can move forward with the other option of using the access on Airport Road.
Oh.
So it wouldn't be compelling the HOA to act one way or the other. It's just saying that if they don't do anything within a certain time, then they can use the airport road access as a fully functional right in, right out.
So, based on this language here, if we were just to adopt staff recommendation, they still have the option to move forward with A or B, correct?
Well, the way that it's worded now, it's set, they only have the option of the fully functional right in, right out in the event that the association will not allow the construction of the turn lane improvements. So the staff recommendation currently does not get into timeframes of when they approve it or when they don't approve it, and it doesn't specify what allowing the construction or allowing it with conditions, or it doesn't really get into any kind of detail. It doesn't specify that it needs to be an amendment of the easement that's in place. It doesn't get into any of those kinds of details and leaves it to those parties to determine. And I think the applicant's requesting that the board amend the staff recommendation to get a little bit more precise on those things, to put a time frame and to specify what it means to allow the construction or not to allow it.
And legally, are we permitted, I mean, does it carry any weight for us to do this?
Well, I think certainly the board is legally allowed to put some kind of time frame as to when that should occur, so that there can be some certainty to it. I mean, there's, the traffic studies are the support for the decision. You've heard from the traffic engineers, it's an access issue. Whether or not this right in, right out option is going to still accomplish the purposes of access without creating a congestion problem. You've heard evidence on that. So, it's entirely within the discretion of the board to allow them to have this right in, right out, or not.
Okay, so we could make a motion that we accept the board's or the staff's recommendation, which would be A and B, with a time frame of on or before, whatever, September 17th. And if they have not resolved the problem as of September 17th, as of that date, that then they would be assumed that this is acceptable and proceed. Is that what they're asking us to do?
I believe so. I mean, that was the date that they requested 30 days from today, was that essentially if the board does not approve a turn lane on Carillon Boulevard, then the developer can go ahead and put in a fully functional right in, right out on Airport. But I think
you're eliminating the turn lane that we're asking the board to approve. If they don't approve it, it's going back to the idea that we can just have that one entrance off of Airport Boulevard.
Well, they currently have an easement for Carillon Boulevard. So the board can't affect that or interfere with that. That's a legal document that they already have in place. So they'll have access through Carillon regardless. But whether or not they can add a fully functional access onto Airport Road, that's the issue that's in front of the board. Right now, or as is presented, as staff presents it here, they're only allowed to put in that fully functional right in, right out in the event that the association does not allow a turn lane on Carillon Boulevard.
Who's on first?
I'm sorry.
That's why I asked if we could just move it with staff recommendations and you guys hash it out, but,
You certainly can. You certainly can do that.
Mr. Chairman, we're fine. I think Jared's summary earlier was recommending the approval as staff has recommended with the change, and I thought you described it well, that it would be the granting of an amendment to the easement to allow the construction improvements to Carillon Lakes, Carillon Boulevard, with it by owner before September 17. He left that blank date, but that's what we had requested. And I think that addresses it. And maybe one thing that helps, right now it's A, that's all there is. You know, everything that's underlined is new. With A, if they do not grant it, we can't satisfy the condition. So this allows us that flexibility that we can do A or B. And we want, for B, we need some certainty. And I think Jared has described it well, that we need to know that we have an amendment to the easement agreement to allow the construction of those improvements, because that's technically what allows us to do it. And we want a date certain just because we're 7 months down the road, and we want a date certain. And we've requested, we would like it to be wrapped up. By the time it gets to the city commission, we want all this resolved. And that was the purpose of it's 30 days from now, and it's right before the city commission final reading. So that's why we requested that date.
But this condition does not exist until the city commission approves it on the 20th. And so I think staff is okay with having some type of date certain in here, but our recommendation would be that it's a date certain after September 20th, after the commission approves this condition.
It's true, because the board's making an advisory recommendation to the commission. So, you know, if the board were to advise a deadline date, that it has no legal
Can we just
operation to it.
Can we just say upon approval by the city commission? In other words, that's, once the city commission does it, approves, has their meeting, and if they approve it.
Then 30 days on top of that?
Pardon?
30 days on top of that?
Right, you could do 30 days from the effective date of the PUD,
Yeah.
that the easement needs to be recorded within 30 days of the effective date of the PUD. That would be in a condition that, you know, the commission could actually adopt, and that
Right.
and that staff could act on.
As far as the safety requirements this gentleman raised, that's a public hearing in itself for the city commission, so that can be raised at that's something the city commission's going to have to.
Well, no, the safety and security issues that the gentleman raised, those would be, you know, things that potentially the homeowners association could try to work in some additional conditions into the easement that they modify. That's between those two private parties to work out and negotiate those things. Whatever conditions they want to put in, that it's up to them to negotiate. But with this, if the board were to, or the commission, I should say, were to adopt this 30-day deadline, then you know, certainly the association would lose a lot of negotiation leverage after that 30 days expires, because the developer would not need that easement to be amended anymore to move forward with their development. They could go ahead and begin developing, and they would simply put the right in, right out on Airport Boulevard, and they would not need to amend the easement any longer. And so that would obviously would affect the negotiation if the developer did not need that document amended anymore. So that's why, I mean, another reason to give the association a little bit more time to have that discussion.
Mr. Chairman, if it helps, while we're so far down this road, we want to get this resolved, and that's why we requested 30 days. If it helps the commission, we would agree, and we understand Teresa's point and Jared's point, that it be a period of time, 15 or 30 days after the adoption of the PUD, instead of prior to the city commission approval. If that helps, we are fine with that.
I'm ready to make a motion if we're ready. I would motion to approve staff recommendation with the amendment that B reads a fully functional right in, right out driveway access on Airport Road with southbound right turn lane as required by DOT in the event that, and I'm adding language here, within 30 days of effective date of PUD, continue on with the existing language that Carillon Lakes Property Owners Association will not, adding language here, provide easement to allow construction, continuing language of the turn lane improvements on Carillon Boulevard, and the rest would continue on.
Everybody have that?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you very much. I know it's a complicated matter and appreciate your consideration, and we will continue to work with the association and move forward with what will be a very nice project. So thank you. Have a great day.
Item 11, plat approval for VA Lakeland subdivision on 20.62 acres located north of Meadowland Park Drive, east of Lakeland Highlands Road. Owner, Holloway Park Foundation, Inc. Applicant, Chastain Skillman, Inc.
Good morning. For the record, again, Joshua Chan with Community Economic Development. Chastain Skillman Incorporated, on behalf of the Holloway Park Foundations Incorporated, have submitted a subdivision plat for the VA Lakeland subdivision, which you see before you now. The proposed plat consists of one lot on approximately 20.62 acres, generally located north of Meadowland Park Drive and east of Lakeland Highlands Road. Plats are reviewed by the city subdivision review team for compliance with Article 9, which is our subdivision regulations within our land development code, and staff does recommend approval. And with that, I'll stand for any questions you may have.
Any questions? Is there a motion to approve the staff recommendation?
Make a motion that we approve the staff recommendation.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
So before I jump into the report on City Commission action and the Planning and Zoning Board recommendations along with the manager's report, I just wanted to follow up to that last item that you approved, and just for the benefit of you and then also the public that may be watching, let them know the status of that development. So has that site received site plan approval already, or are they close? And I'm looking at Chuck since he chairs that committee.
Oh, I apologize. Is this for the VA clinic?
For the VA, yes.
The VA clinic is very close to getting site plan approval. It's not quite there yet, but I would expect that they would have it within the next 2 weeks or so.
Yeah, so the construction activity you're seeing now in Lakeland Highlands is for the self-storage facility right at the intersection there. Moving on to the report of City Commission items that have been approved. Jump ahead to that in the agenda. At the meeting of July 19th, they approved the planned unit development for the Druid Street townhomes. And they also had second reading for the adoption of our comprehensive plan. And as it relates to the comprehensive plan, that has been provided to the Department of Economic Opportunity, so they're aware that it's been adopted. There's now a period of time within which the state completes their review, and we await for them to give us notice of them issuing what they call a final order. And then once that's done, then the comp plan will become effective, and I believe it's 21 days after that issuance of their final order. So it's not effective yet, but we hope it'll be effective likely by the end of September, beginning of October. And then looking at items coming forward, there is a conditional use request for Southwest Middle School. So that campus is being renovated. So they've developed a new master plan for the campus. There will be some demolition of the majority of the buildings, and this will allow for the adoption of that master plan through a conditional use. There's a modification being requested for what's known as the Morgan Creek planned unit development, and this is for future phases immediately west of the existing phase 1 of Morgan Creek. And the intent is to create a standalone subdivision that will now be known as Gresham Trails, and will not have access through Morgan Creek. So that'll be coming through as a PUD modification. There's also a PUD requested for 3201 Airport Road. So this is the north side of Carillon Boulevard. so the property that is sandwiched between Carillon Boulevard and the Polk Parkway. And that request is for an assisted living facility on that property that would have access to Airport Road, not through Carillon Boulevard. And finally, there is a zoning request for property that the CRA owns, and I believe that they plan to, they call it disposition, so sell or convey the property for another use. And I don't know if Matt has any details on what that proposed use is, if it's a residential use or commercial.
It would be, I believe, for a medical office.
Medical office
Yes.
at 103 West 7th Street, so north of Memorial Boulevard. And then we will also add to the September agenda an amendment to the comprehensive plan, and that amendment will address recent legislation that requires all local governments to now have a property rights element within their comprehensive plan. So we have some guidance from DEO through our local regional planning council as to what that should include to be consistent with the state legislation. So we need to bring that forward to this board and then ultimately get it approved by the commission to allow for us to then proceed with additional comprehensive plan amendments. And that concludes my report.
Anything else? Any questions? Saying nothing else, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.